Chapter 452. When the letter was placed in front of him, Kuang Yi knew that he couldn't refuse. Not to mention that for the stability of the Southern Ming Empire, they couldn't afford to offend the powerful mercenaries. Just a few days ago, Hu Yan and Madame Shui almost died in the city. They were responsible. They didn't pursue the matter because they knew that it had nothing to do with them. However, if he didn't agree to the envoy sent by Min King to meet with Yang Qindong, then the other party could bring up this matter at any time. At that time, they could casually accuse them of colluding with the assassins. This would make it difficult for them to defend themselves. Face was given to each other. Fortunately, Kuang Yi knew that Yang Qindong still had the Yang family manor in Baiming. The Southern Ming Empire had Jianning and brother Yang Si. He couldn't betray the great Ming Empire and didn't dare to do it. Therefore, he made the decision and agreed to the request. Kuang Yi agreed. This was also why Yu Guang didn't dare to act rashly when he saw all this happening right under his nose. The mercenaries were only a squad of soldiers. They brought Chen Tian and his hundreds of subordinates through the city. To be honest, Chen Tian was a little nervous at this moment. Originally, he thought that the mercenaries would send at least a few hundred people, or even a few thousand people to escort him. However, there were only 10 people and they had to walk through the city controlled by the Southern Ming army. This was no longer a matter of safety. It was a provocation. Would the Southern Ming army really do something in anger? If that was the case, wouldn't his life be over? With this kind of nervousness, the group smoothly walked through the city of Gaozhou. When Chen Tian saw that the city had been left behind, he suddenly felt a burst of cold wind at the back of his head. At this moment, he remembered that he hadn't walked out of the gates of hell. He had just stepped into this place. For example, if he didn't have an agreement with Yang Qindong this time, how would he return to the Miao family's camp from the mercenaries' camp? Without the mercenaries' escort, how could he guarantee his safety? Only at this moment did he feel fear. In the mercenary camp, Tiger's Mane, representing Yang Qindong, met Chen Tian first. He served him good food and wine, fulfilling his role as a host. Chen Tian didn't expect to see Yang Qindong the moment he arrived. Fortunately, he was prepared for this. After investigating Yang Qindong, he knew what kind of person Tiger's Mane was and the importance of his position. So while he was eating, he ordered his men to carry 2 big boxes of gold and place them in front of Tiger's Mane. One box was worth 1,000 taels of gold, so 2 boxes would be worth 2,000 taels of gold. According to the exchange rate of 1 to 8, that would be 16,000 taels of silver. To an ordinary citizen, this amount of silver was more than enough to eat and drink for a lifetime. And this was just Chen Tian's greeting gift. He had already explained to Tiger's Mane that as long as he could meet the Duke of Loyalty, there would be more than 10 times the amount in front of him. The first gift was more than 100,000 taels of silver, and it wasn't even given to the main person. From this, it seemed that Chen Tian was very sincere. Tiger's Mane also stared greedily at the silver in front of him. I can try to see if you can meet my duke, but do you know that Yingzhong has already promised to give Songjiang prefecture's unused shipyard to my duke? In comparison, if it's just some gold and silver, I'm afraid it's not sincere enough. He wasn't afraid of making a request, but he was afraid of not saying anything. Chen Tian's eyes were filled with excitement. Of course, we won't just take out these things. In order to show our Min King's sincerity, there are already 500 carriages of steel being sent here. It should arrive in a few days. 500 carriages? Tiger's Mane pretended to be very surprised and then nodded. Well, then I'll try to help you put in a few good words. Tiger's Mane was only willing to help because of the silver. Thank you, General Tiger. If we can achieve our goal this time, Chen Tian will still have more rewards. You're too kind, Tiger's Mane said with a greedy face and poured a cup of wine directly into his stomach. And on the same night, Chen Tian was allowed to meet Yang Qindong. He met the extremely young but powerful Duke of Loyalty of the Ming Dynasty. Chen Tian greets the Duke of Loyalty. After meeting, Chen Tian's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. He cupped his hands and bowed respectfully. At this time, young Chendong was only 21 years old. However, after experiencing so much, he already had the demeanor of a superior person. If he was willing, he could reveal the aura of a superior person at any time. You are Chen Tian? Young Chendong, who was sitting at the head of the tent, stared at the person who came and sized him up. Then, he said very casually, I heard from Tiger's Mane that you are very good at doing things. You even want to give me a gift? Is it because your king of Min is afraid of me? Unlike the calmness he showed when he was with Leng Feng, at this moment, young Chendong showed a very arrogant side. Although Chen Tian looked submissive at this time, in fact, he was quietly observing young Chendong. Before this, he had grasped a certain amount of data and even read a lot of intelligence. However, Chen Tian believed in everything he saw with his own eyes. Although the intelligence said that the Duke of Loyalty was courageous and talented, Chen Tian always thought that this person was still too young. Even if he was young, it was inevitable that he would lose his cool when something happened, especially when he had won repeatedly. It was inevitable that he would be arrogant. Now, it seemed that it was true. Seeing that young Chendong had only glanced at him a few times before ignoring him with his nose in the air, not only did he not feel humiliated, on the contrary, he was very happy. It was good to have a weakness. As long as he could grasp it, it would be easy to deal with him. Yes, our King of Min really wants to be friends with you. You saved Emperor Yingzong without fear of death on the battlefield. You forced Walla's army to retreat with your excellent means. You even completely destroyed Master Huang's army in Guangdong in a very short time. Our King of Min is full of praise for all of these. Everyone liked to hear good words, and young Chendong was the same. Hearing Chen Tian talking about his achievements with great familiarity, he laughed and said, Yes, these are all my achievements. Prince of Min is also a sensible person. If so, why didn't he retreat and surrender immediately after knowing my power? Don't tell me that you want me to lead an army to crush you and repeat Huang Yuliang's old path? When speaking of these, young Chendong deliberately stared at him, as if he was going to scare him. Yes, Duke of Loyalty is very right. People had to bow under the eaves. As an excellent lobbyist, he knew when to show his weak side and when to show his strong side. With a submissive expression, young Chendong's expression became much better. Seeing that the sixth young master's temper was not so bad, Chen Tian hurriedly said what he wanted to say. Our King of Min really wants to be friends with you, Duke of Loyalty. He also knows that we will definitely lose if we fight with you. But when he heard the first part, young Chendong was still smiling. But when he heard the last part, his face changed. But what? But I dare not say what I want to say next. I am afraid that I will make you angry. Chen Tian looked up and showed an aggrieved expression. Just say what you want to say. I won't blame you. Say it quickly. Young Chendong looked like he was fooled. Chen Tian knew that the opportunity had come. He straightened his body and said, But if our King of Min stops now, with Yingzong's personality, he will definitely settle the score. At that time, it will be difficult to keep your life. Chen Tian was not surprised. So what? When the time comes, this duke will just greet his majesty. Young Chendong said confidently. When Chen Tian heard this, he despised young Chendong very much. He thought, you are just a duke. How can you boast like this? But what he didn't know was that this was what young Chendong wanted to show him. Thank you for your kindness, Duke of Loyalty. Although Chen Tian didn't agree with what young Chendong said, he still looked very grateful. When he saw the smile on the sixth young master's face, he mustered up his courage and said, But I am afraid that Duke of Loyalty can't protect King of Min at that time. As far as I know, Emperor Yingzong seems to be on guard against Duke of Loyalty. Otherwise, the matter of conferring a prince with a different surname would not be delayed. He stopped here. When he said this, Chen Tian immediately stopped talking and carefully observed young Chendong's performance. He said it just now. If there was anything he wanted to say, he could say it casually. Now, he shouldn't be blamed. Sure enough, Yang Chendong's face was flushed red and he was obviously very angry. He even pointed his finger at Chen Tian who was standing below, but in the end, he didn't say a word of reproach. Brother Chen, what am I doing? Don't you know that this matter is the thing that annoys my duke the most? Tiger's Mane, who was standing at the side, said. He seemed to be reprimanding Chen Tian for being insensible, but in fact, he was also reminding him. Chen Tian showed a grateful smile to Tiger's Mane. Then, his gaze fell on the angry Yang Chendong and said, Duke of Loyalty, Emperor Yingzong is really infuriating. But thinking about it carefully, isn't it because you are too young and your qualifications are too shallow? If you can do something earth-shattering for the world to see, I think that when the time comes, even the stingy Emperor Yingzong can't refuse to be conferred a prince. Chapter 453. What do you mean? Speak more clearly. Yang Chendong, who was originally very angry, suddenly straightened his body and stared at Chen Tian with his tiger-like eyes. Since Yang Chendong placed so much importance on these words, Chen Tian was delighted that the other had fallen into his trap. He cupped his hands and said, I am not talented, but I have an ingenious plan. As long as you can be the Duke of Loyal and Courageous, it will be easy for you to be bestowed the title of king of a different surname. He spoke with such confidence that Yang Chendong's interest was piqued. What is it? Defeat the Jiaoji soldiers and show the strength of the Duke of Loyalty. With a determined face, Chen Tian, who was almost gritting his teeth, finally said what was in his heart. Phew. Exhaling a long breath in his heart, Yang Chendong said in his heart, as expected, the other party really came for this. Although he was relieved, Yang Chendong pretended to be very shocked. Defeat the Jiaoji soldiers? This is not possible. Why can't I? Chen Tian asked in a pressing manner. Jiaoji is so powerful, how can it be so easy to defeat them? Moreover, aren't they the allies of the King of Min? Since we are friends, shouldn't your allies be my friends as well? This is not good. Yang Chendong shook his head lightly and looked like he was talking to himself. When Chen Tian saw this, he felt a sense of disdain in his heart. Just now, he said that he was wise and powerful, and that he would destroy the King of Min's army and ask him to surrender. But when it came to the actual use of weapons, he could not do this and was afraid of that. He really did not understand how such a person could have achieved all those achievements in the past. Chen Tian really despised him in his heart, but he still tried to persuade him. Duke of Loyalty, although Jiaoji is our ally, they are still of a foreign race. As the saying goes, those who are not of our race will have different opinions. The attitude of Rongdi is not the same as that of Hua. No matter what, the King of Min is the king of the Great Ming. He has the pure bloodline of the ancestor. How can he tolerate a foreign race doing whatever they want in the Great Ming? Previously, we had no choice but to form an alliance. But in fact, we were wary of each other. In the end, we were just using each other's relationship. There is no affection. Chen Tian said this righteously and continued, unlike our King of Min, who really appreciates Duke Zhongdan. Moreover, we are all Han people, so we should get closer to each other. Not to mention, this can help the Duke of Loyalty achieve great things and become the king of a foreign race. This kind of helping others is what the King of Min likes the most. What Chen Tian said was magnanimous, and he also pretended to be good for Yang Chendong. But in fact, this was not the case at all. The people of the Security Bureau had already sent back the news that the King of Jiaoji had taken a fancy to the King of Min's sister, Zhu Lian, who was also Princess Yongsheng, and wanted to marry her. Because of this, the King of Min was furious and said that his sister was willing to marry a foreign race's little king. This was almost the same meaning as when the kingdom of Dongwu wanted to marry Guan Yu's daughter and was rebutted. Although this time, the King of Min took advantage of the power of Jiaoji to rise up. But in the end, the King of Min still looked down on the small country of Jiaoji. They were just a small province of the Great Ming before and did not have any cultural inheritance. How could such a person be qualified to marry his sister? Not to mention that there was such a big gap in age. Princess Yongxing was the king of Annan, Lily, when he was 18 years old. In history, he did not live until 1451, but because of his representative, the Longzi borrowed this person's name to let him live longer. The spectators have a strong historical knowledge, so don't doubt the Longzi on this issue. Thank you very much. He was already more than 60 years old. This was clearly pushing his sister into the fire pit. As the elder brother, and now with such great power, if he could not even protect his own sister, what would others say about him? Just based on this point, the relationship between the king of Min, Zhu Huixing, and the Jiaoji army started to drift apart. In addition, along the way, the Jiaoji army burned, killed, and looted everywhere they passed. They were very overboard and caused the people's lives to be in chaos. The king of Min had already made up his mind to deal with them. It was precisely because of these things that Chen Tian came here to fan the flames and wanted to use someone else to do his dirty work. In their eyes, as long as the two sides could fight, regardless of whether Yang Qindong won in the end or the Jiaoji army won in the end, it would be beneficial to them. Since that was the case, why should they be polite? Chen Tian had his own plans, but he did not know that the handsome young man, Yao Yingjun, who was on good terms with Princess Yongxing, Zhu Lian, was an important spy that the Security Bureau had placed in the other side. The information regarding this had already been sent back, and Yang Qindong was well aware of it. This was the importance of information. If he knew everything in advance, he would have more time to deal with it, and he would be able to find the best way to solve the problem. What Chen Tian said was extremely righteous. From the perspective of the nation and country, even if Yang Qindong knew the truth, he would not correct it. Wasn't all of this what he wanted to do? Since he could not do anything to the Han people? Then it should not be a problem to deal with the foreign races. Especially Jiaoji, the predecessor of the modern Vietnam. They had betrayed the country several times and angered the brave People's Liberation Army, causing them to kill their way into their territory. The most hateful thing was that the other party's military warehouse was filled with all sorts of goods that were made in China. That kind of feeling must have been very chilling. In order to prevent such things from happening in the future, Yang Qindong made up his mind to deal with them a few hundred years in advance, so that those disgusting things would never happen again and would disappear forever. With this in mind, Yang Qindong did not expose some of Chen Tian's lies. Instead, he went along with Chen Tian's words and asked, "Against Jiaoji, will you support me?" This. Chen Tian's face changed from his heroic speech to a trace of awkwardness. This means that we cannot support you in terms of military strength. After all, everyone knows that they are our Min King's allies. Don't worry, Duke of Loyalty. Although we won't send troops, we will support you in other aspects, such as provisions and information. As long as you don't send troops, we, King of Min, will fully support you if you need anything else. As if he was afraid that Yang Qindong would have some misgivings, Chen Tian patted his chest and promised. Is that so? Yang Qindong did not answer immediately. Instead, he fell into deep thought, as if he was thinking carefully. Yang Qindong's lack of response caused Chen Tian to lose his confidence. He was afraid that Yang Qindong would reject him, so he quickly signaled to Tiger's Mane, who was standing at the side and receiving benefits from him, with his eyes. Tiger's Mane hesitated at first, but soon made a decision. He looked at Yang Qindong and said, "Duke, Jiaoji has gone too far. Didn't they try to assassinate you 2 days ago? If we don't teach them a lesson, won't we be looked down upon and become a joke to the world?" Yes, yes. Chen Tian slapped his head. How could he have forgotten about this? He quickly said, "Jiaoji sent people to assassinate me. This is really shameful and hateful. Just based on this point alone, we have to teach them a lesson. This is the only way to show the dominance of the loyal and courageous Duke." That's true. Yang Qindong slowly raised his head and agreed. However, he soon shook his head. "No, if we were to fight with the Jiaoji soldiers and the Min King suddenly attacked us from behind, we won't be able to withstand a pincer attack." When he heard Yang Qindong's concerns, Chen Tian immediately replied, "That is impossible. Our Min king is a man of his words. He would never do something so treacherous. Jiaoji is your ally. Yang Qindong ignored Chen Tian's solemn vow. He only said one sentence and the other party was instantly silenced. But what does the loyal duke want us to do for you to be completely assured? Chen Tian did not know how to convince Yang Qindong. Even though they had decided not to fight with the mercenaries in the short term, there were some things that others would not believe even if he said it. Show me your sincerity. Let's ask the Min king to write a declaration of war and spread it throughout the world, stating that he and Jiaoji have completely broken up. This way, I will believe your sincerity and will send troops. How about that? In addition, you have just occupied Yunnan, Guangxi and Guangdong provinces. I believe you have a lot of captives in your hands. Coincidentally, the leader of the mercenaries, the big brother that I saved, is in need of people. You should also show some sincerity and make my big brother happy. Not a lot, just 100,000 people. Men, women, old and young are acceptable. Yang Qindong proposed the plan that he had decided on long ago. Yang Qindong, who understood the situation of the Min king, naturally knew that the other party did not like the Jiaoji army and would not make a move on him in the short term. However, there was always a possibility. Before the situation changed, who knew what would happen in the future? Most importantly, if he wanted to do this, he would need the support of Nanming. This declaration of war became very important. This was also the reason why he could convince Minister Kuang Ye to not make an enemy out of the Min king and the Miao army and focus on dealing with Jiaoji. Without this declaration of war, how would others believe him if he just said it himself? At least, it would be easier for him to ask for 100,000 people. He had just occupied 3 provinces. Others might not have it, but he had a lot of people in his territory. Moreover, he did not only want young people. In this way, he could also help the other party solve the problem of having too many people but not enough food. Yang Qindong proposed his own request. This time, it was Chen Tian's turn to consider. 100,000 people was indeed a problem. He could just give more to the older children and less to the young men. He could make the decision on this issue. If he wanted to make a declaration, it would not be a big deal. However, would people say that the Min king was burning the bridge after crossing the river? After all, they were able to rise so quickly because of the Jiaoji army's help in the beginning. Chapter 454. While Chen Tian was still considering the gains and losses, Yang Qindong spoke again. Jiaoji is a foreign tribe after all. If Prince of Min really wants to achieve something in the future, it would be best for you to draw a clear line with them. They were not like the Miao people. They had been living on this land for generations and were used to being in each other's company. Jiaoji people were very independent. If they were to become successful one day, it would be enough for His Highness, Prince of Min, to be very busy. Of course, you can go back and discuss this with Prince of Min. We are not in a hurry. Yang Qindong was indeed not in a hurry. Regardless of whether it was the steel that Zhu Qizhen wanted to give him or the steel that Prince of Min gave him, they had not arrived yet. With the mindset that having the steel in his hands was the way of the king, he would not do anything as long as these benefits were not in his hands. Even though he was already mentally prepared to fight Jiaoji, he still had to take things one step at a time. Chen Tian thought that there were some things that he could not decide, so he raised his head and said seriously, "Then I will report it to His Highness King Min. I think it will not take long for Duke Zhongdan to give a satisfactory answer. But please rest assured that regardless of whether this matter is successful or not, we have no intention of becoming enemies with Duke of Loyalty and the mercenaries." Yang Qindong nodded satisfactorily at the other party's goodwill. Good. As long as Prince of Min's army and the Miao army do not make things difficult for us, we will not take the initiative to cause trouble. You can rest assured about this. This was considered an agreement that both parties agreed upon. Based on this agreement, Chen Tian did not come here in vain. Thinking that Prince of Min still had to make a decision on the declaration of war, and thinking that Jiaoji was pressuring him step by step, he decided to take his leave. Following this, Ling Feng naturally sent them out of the camp. Unlike when he came, the hundreds of chests of gold and silver that Chen Tian brought were all placed in the mercenaries' camp. This was originally a show of sincerity. Since the negotiations went smoothly, there was no mention of taking back the chests. Not long after Chen Tian left, Tiger's Mane represented him on a trip to Gaozhou's prefectural city. He followed the young master's instructions and explained the key points of this negotiation to the other party. Kuang Yi was waiting for news in the government office. Since Yang Chendong sent someone to inform him that there would be an envoy from King of Min, Kuang Yi could not sit still. Yang Chendong and his mercenaries were so powerful that he was shocked more than once. The current southern Ming Empire was already riddled with holes. They were already facing huge difficulties. If the mercenaries switched sides at this time, the southern Ming Empire would really be in danger. It was precisely because he knew the severity of the matter that he didn't have a single moment of rest in the 2 days since Chen Tian had passed through the city and arrived at the mercenary camp. Because of this matter, Guaning, Ma Wei, and the others repeatedly tried to persuade him. For example, they said that Yang Chendong's fourth brother was still in Jianghu. If the Duke of Loyal Courage dared to make a move, they could use his fourth brother to threaten him. Some people even suggested that when Chen Tian passed through the city, they could kill the envoy directly. By then, it would be more difficult for the Duke of Loyal Courage to ally with King of Min. In the face of these schemes, by the time they reached Kuang Yi, they were all rejected by him. Now Yang Chendong had not made a final decision. If they pushed him so hard, it would be easy for him to be pushed to the side of the opponent. If so, they would really be sinners for all eternity. Kuang Yi, who was already very old, would not agree to such a risky thing. Not to mention, based on his understanding of Yang Chendong, this person was very considerate of the overall situation. Otherwise, he would not send troops to Guangdong to quell the rebellion of the Yellow Bandits without receiving any benefits. It was only because the emperor, Zhu Qizhen, did not believe in all kinds of things that led to the current situation that was not very good. Thinking of the emperor, Zhu Qizhen, Kuang Yi also felt a headache. Since ancient times, the imperial power was the greatest. This was indisputable. But there was a premise for everything, that was, the imperial power was consolidated. When the power was strong, it was really the greatest. On the contrary, if you were not strong enough and still wanted others to obey you, then the emperor was not sensible. Not all the generals in the world were like Yu Fei, who could be called back with 12 gold medals. Who was Yang Chendong? If one looked carefully, he had been wandering outside the imperial power. In fact, with the powerful mercenaries as his backing, he also had such strength. In the face of such a strong soldier, the most important thing to do was to find a way to make friends with him and play the emotional card, instead of oppressing him with power and finally making a loss. Of course, although Kuang Yi was also an important minister, he could not represent the emperor in many things. Some things he just thought in his heart. If he really wanted to say that he really wanted to blame Zhu Qizhen, he did not have the power to do so, let alone the ability to bear the consequences. While Kuang Ye's thoughts were still in torment, Tiger's Mane came. This was Yang Chendong's closest person. Many times, his appearance could represent his master. In the main hall, Kuang Yi saw Tiger's Mane. Although he did not personally come out to greet him, his waiting figure in front of the hall was enough to give Tiger's Mane face. Who was Tiger's Mane? In these years, after being trained by Yang Chendong, he was no longer the little follower of the past. This meant that he was reluctant to leave Yang Chendong. Otherwise, if he was casually sent back to Tsuxian City, he would be in existence on the same level as Ling Song and Gao Xiong. It was not impossible for him to be higher than them. Seeing that Kuang Yi was waiting outside the hall, this kind of treatment made him feel flattered. He hurriedly took a few steps forward, clasped his fist and bowed. This little Tiger's Mane greets the minister. Haha. Kuang Yi politely extended his hand and helped Tiger's Mane up. Brother Tiger, there is no need to be so polite. Come, please sit in the hall. Servants, come and serve tea. Kuang Ye's face was full of enthusiasm. Tiger's mane was also very respectful on the surface, but in his heart, he admired the young master even more. If it was not for the young master's strength, how could he be treated with such courtesy? One must know that this was the Minister of War, and also the Crown Prince's tutor. How could an ordinary person like him come into contact with him, let alone be treated with such courtesy? Tiger's mane's thinking was correct. The Ming dynasty's hierarchy was very strict. An official was an official, and a citizen was a citizen. This was not something that could be confused at any time. Even if this official's position wasn't high, and the other party was a rich gentleman, the official still had to be stronger in a real conversation. This was because he didn't just represent himself, he had the support of the entire team of scholars behind him. Not to mention a high official like Kuang Yi. Other than the emperor, there were very few people who could give him any face. But it was this kind of person with such a high position that was able to come out of the hall to greet him. If it were any other citizen, they would have already knelt on the ground, with tears flowing down their faces, as if they were willing to die for their friend. Exaggeratedly, even if they were immediately asked to die, there would probably be people who would agree. But all of this was completely different when it came to Tiger's mane. Following the young master, and especially seeing the development of Crimson City, his vision had long been different from ordinary people. In his heart, even the emperors of the Southern Ming Dynasty and Northern Ming Dynasty could not be compared to his young master, let alone a minister of war. Moreover, a minister of war who was weak and defeated. With this confidence, when Tiger's mane spoke to Kuang Yi, he maintained enough autonomy, neither servile nor overbearing, and did not have the slightest intention of lowering his head. Kuang Yi listened carefully to Tiger's mane's report. When he first heard that there were 100,000 people, he did not seem to understand. After all, why would the mercenary army need so many Han people? But then when he heard that Yang Qindong asked the king of Min to make a public declaration of war against the Jiaoji army, his attention was completely diverted. He suddenly stood up from his chair. Did the king of Min agree? Not yet. Tiger's mane acted as if he did not see Kuang Yi's excitement. He shook his head and said, "The messenger Chen Tian said that he would go back and discuss with the king of Min. But my young master also said that there would be no problem." Yang Qindong said that there would be no problem, so Kuang Yi was much more confident. It had been proven that on such a major issue, the Duke of Loyalty would not speak without thinking. And if this was the case, it would be great. Without the support of the Jiaoji army, the strength of the king of Min's faction would naturally be greatly reduced. At least in the short term, they would not have the strength to continue north. This would give Southern Ming more time to breathe. Once they made good use of it, the recruited recruits would be trained, and it would be equivalent to having another powerful army. At that time, they would go all out to the south and solve the problem of the king of Min. Thinking that Southern Ming finally saw the dawn of revival, Kuang Yi's spirit became much better. When he looked at Tiger's mane, his tone became more determined. "Then I will have to trouble Brother Tiger to convey to the Duke of Loyalty that we thank him for everything he has done for Southern Ming. If this matter is successful, it will be a great merit. I will report it to the emperor." Tiger's mane felt that Kuang Yi's words were sincere. He cupped his fist and said, "I thank Minister for your kind words on behalf of my young master. Oh yes, my young master also said that once the king of Min really makes a public declaration of war, Minister, please give up on Gaozhou Prefecture for your own safety. Southern Ming should also take this opportunity to recuperate. Once the training of the new army is completed, then it will be time to go south and solve the problem of the king of Min. Before that, it is better not to act rashly. Otherwise, the situation will become very troublesome." Hu Mang's words were a little decisive, and even a little unpleasant to hear. The gist of it was that without the mercenaries here, Kuang Yi and his 1,000 men would not be able to defend Gaozhou Prefecture no matter what. At first glance, it did seem like he was looking down on them, but wasn't this the reality? Chapter 455. Not to mention the huge difference in military strength between the two sides, Gaozhou Prefecture was already an isolated city. Around him, except for the road back home in the northeast, the other directions were all occupied by the king of Min and the Miao people. In such a situation, even if they did not attack the city, they could surround Kuang Yi to death. The situation was like this. It was not because Tiger's Mane's words were unpleasant. Kuang Yi, who knew this, was not angry. Instead, he clasped his fist and thanked him. I am grateful that Duke Zhongdan is still thinking for me. Brother Tiger, please go back and tell Duke Zhongdan that I am not an inflexible person. I will give up Gaozhou Prefecture and return to Nanjing to train the new army. Kuang Yi was so honest and admitted his shortcomings and weaknesses. This made Tiger's Mane think highly of him. Okay, I will pass on your words to my young master. I will take my leave now. While Tiger's Mane and Kuang Yi were talking, Yang Chendong called the two regiment commanders to discuss in the tent. Regiment Commander Liu, I have equipped all your auxiliary soldiers with Type 81 rifles. How are you guys getting used to it? After returning a simple and efficient military salute, Yang Chendong asked the auxiliary regiment commander, Lu Zhua. The last time he fought with Miao Bing using cold weapons against cold weapons, the result was naturally a great victory. However, his side's losses were not small, at least in Yang Chendong's eyes. In order to preserve his sufficient strength, and also to display his sufficient advantages, he decided to equip all the auxiliary soldiers on the battlefield with the 81 automatic rifle, which was commonly known as the 81 automatic rifle. The reason why they were not equipped with a better 95 style was because they wanted to differentiate the cold edge from the auxiliary weapons. Secondly, and more importantly, with the current strength of Crimson Nest City's arsenal, they were still unable to create the 95 style. Even for the Type 81 rifles, Yang Chendong first took out a large number of finished products for them to understand and disassemble. In addition, they already had the successful experience of their predecessors. A lot of information was found in the warehouse. It was because of all these advantages that the Type 81 assault rifle could be used. It had to be said that there was no lack of smart people everywhere, especially the craftsmen of the great Ming dynasty. In terms of intelligence, they were no worse than the craftsmen of any other period. It was only because they didn't have enough development environment that they naturally went from being brilliant to being ordinary. During the Ming dynasty, craftsmen had very little social status and their income was extremely low. It was already considered good if they could fill their stomachs. Even so, there were still some people who wanted to invent something that was very practical and pushed the development of social science forward. Unfortunately, the person who made such a contribution did not receive a reward that was proportional to his efforts. There were even some people who gathered the materials for their own experiments. Once they succeeded, the fruits would belong to the Ministry of Works and the Emperor. The only thing they would get was the title of a good craftsman, which couldn't be eaten or exchanged for money. Under such a system without any incentives, it was easy to imagine that even the best craftsman would soon become a commoner. However, the same people in Yang Chendong's hands were completely different. The armament factory in Crimson City implemented a guaranteed incentive system. The guaranteed salary referred to how much money you would receive after completing the work at hand. The incentive system referred to how much you would receive after completing the task or making other contributions. In fact, the craftsmen of this dynasty did not lack strength and brains. Once there was space for them to display their abilities, everyone would hold their breaths and fiercely exert their strength. Because of this, many outstanding people appeared. Not only did they receive honors, such as medals of various levels in their hands, they also received large amounts of gold and silver. This reward system that not only gave them fame but also money made all the craftsmen burn with passion. Under such a big environment, naturally, they would get twice the result with half the effort. Just like the armament factory, the quality of steel determined how many guns and cannons could be produced. In the process of tempering steel, with the help of the books provided by Yang Chendong, they could make the steel more solid instead of being so brittle. They could also increase the density of the steel so that there would not be many small bubbles in the performance, which would be easy to explode. Regarding this basic knowledge, there were clear records in the books. As long as one diligently studied, they would discover that many of the principles were not that difficult to understand. It was just that they lacked imagination. Once he did it, he would realize that things were so simple when he looked back. The armament factory began to expand and improve. Batch after batch of Type 81 rifles were brought out and sent to the temporary port of Liezhou Prefecture a few days ago. At this point, all the auxiliary soldiers had changed their equipment. Speaking of which, facing Yang Qindong's inquiry, the auxiliary commander Lu Zhua had an excited expression. "Sixth young master, don't worry. Most of these people have practiced guns before. After a short period of adjustment, they will be able to regain that feeling. Once on the battlefield, they will definitely be able to display their strengths." It was no wonder that Lu Zhuo was so excited. In the past, he had only seen the Cold Vanguard use advanced firearms to slaughter enemies. Although they were also equipped with the new type of bows and crossbows, the effective range was still too short. The advantage wasn't very obvious. Because of this matter, the battalion commanders and company commanders below him had looked for him more than once. They had asked him when they would be able to be like the Cold Vanguard and use advanced firearms to kill enemies in battle. In the past, when faced with this question, Lu Zhuo would remain silent because he didn't know when this day would come. But now, the Type 81 rifles were given out. Although they were still lacking in functionality compared to the Type 95, especially since they were handmade, there were still some differences between the same gun. It still required the soldiers to familiarize themselves with each gun. However, compared to the cold weapons in the enemy's hands, these rifles were already many times stronger. Once they used these Type 81 rifles on the battlefield in the next war, it was easy to imagine what the outcome would be. Just thinking about it made him excited. Lu Zhuo was still standing there with a face full of excitement. Yang Qindong's gaze had already landed on the commander of the Cold Vanguard 2nd Regiment, Luo Pa. The brothers of the Cold Vanguard will have to work hard for a while. Teach the auxiliary soldiers how to use guns and how to maintain them. And you guys, you must pay close attention to the safekeeping and use of guns. Absolutely do not allow any guns to be lost. Even more so, do not allow anything bad to happen. Once someone shows signs of doing something bad, immediately kick them out of the team. Do not show any mercy. His gaze once again landed on Kong Jia and Song Zhe, the 2 regiment political commissars. Yang Qindong's tone was a little strict. Guns were not like other things. Once in the hands of the enemy, they could create chaos or even assassinate people. They could take people's lives in the blink of an eye. In the face of such an advanced double-edged sword, one had to be vigilant. This was also why only the auxiliary soldiers were issued Type 81 rifles. The temporary auxiliary soldiers who had not been through much training still used cold weapons. "Sixth young master, don't worry. We know. Normally, when there is no mission, each person will only fire 5 bullets. Also, there will be a check in the morning and evening. Soldiers have the right to supervise each other. As long as there is no platoon or squad covering for each other, nothing will happen," the 2 regiment political commissars said with a solemn expression. Clearly, they had also realized the benefits and corresponding dangers that advanced guns could bring to them. Thus, they had long prepared for it. That's the best. You have to talk to the soldiers in a timely manner. Make full use of your advantage in thinking. Once there are any bad signs or problems with the soldiers, you have to immediately enlighten and solve them. Today's matter can't be left to tomorrow. Yang Qindong nodded and said again in a strict tone. After discussing the issue of guns, his gaze landed on the 4 officers and said, "Make use of the time to rest and reorganize. It won't be long before we move out. At that time, I'm afraid that it will be impossible for everyone to rest as much as you do now. So, now is the time to mobilize before the war." When they heard the words, "mobilize before the war," the 2 regimental commanders and the 2 political commissars couldn't help but tremble. Compared to the Ming army who was afraid of war, they had been waiting for this day because only war could quickly expand their strength. Only war could show their ability. Yes. The 4 of them gave a very standard military salute in unison. At this moment, every one of their breaths became a little hurried. Crimson City. Compared to 2 years ago when Yang Qindong left this place, it could be said that it was completely different. Spacious and clean cement roads, neat and orderly buildings of various types, self-contained and well-equipped new residential areas, all kinds of factories and units, one after another. Looking from afar, who knew how many tall chimneys were emitting black smoke? This was far from the time to care about environmental issues. At this moment, the world had yet to experience the industrial era. It was originally very well protected, and Crimson City was the first industrial city. Every day, many of the things manufactured here would be transported by the Navy of the Cold Front to the nearby areas. For example, items as small as toilet paper, toothpaste, toothbrushes, chewing gum, soap, towels, nail clippers, sugar, canned food, and so on. As large as mirrors, glass, cosmetics, cheongsams, and so on, all of them were best-selling products. They were all in short supply and were sent to some nearby countries. These things were exchanged for countless gold and silver, rice, flour, cloth, and various ores and steel. With the raw materials, on Ryukyu Island, as long as it was Yangtze's territory, everyone's life became better. They had enough food and clothing, and their homes were filled with all kinds of food and silver. In order to ensure that these fruits of victory were not stolen and plundered by others, everyone gave their all to push this carriage forward. Chapter 456. One of the branch factories of the main food factory, the instant noodle factory. The factory's director, Zhou Dai, was leading nearly 3,000 workers in the factory to make the newly developed instant noodle. This was the political task given by the sixth young master in a letter. Along with the detailed process of making instant noodle, there were also 2 boxes of finished products. Zhou Dai was the first person to fully understand the book and develop the first bowl of instant noodle. According to the reward system, after passing the political review and confirming that there were no problems with the person and family background, he became the first factory director of the instant noodle factory. Before, when he heard that the first person to develop instant noodle would be the factory director and become the leader of 3,000 people, Zhou Dai didn't believe it. But when he really did it and was entrusted with this important task, at this moment, he was extremely excited. At the same time, his admiration for the sixth young master was like a torrential river. No one knew when it started, but there was a legend in Kaohsiung City. It was said that the sixth young master was a god sent by the gods to save the hardworking people and change the world. Otherwise, why would the sixth young master always be able to come up with all kinds of new things that they had never heard of before, or even dared to think about? The ancient people were originally very superstitious, and most of them didn't have any culture, so it was easy for them to be taken advantage of. In addition, young Qindong did indeed get a lot of good things that smart people couldn't think of, such as the various advanced guns and cannons guarding Ryukyu Island. With these facts, more and more people believed in this legend, so much so that the Yangtze higher-ups who first spread this rumor also agreed with it. Instant noodle was precisely based on this legend. Of course, this was also due to the big warehouse. When the bags of instant noodle were opened and soaked in hot water and eaten by everyone was full of praise and praise. The higher-ups immediately decided to rush the production of these things. Not only could they replace food to provide food for the people, but they would also be excellent military supplies if they were placed in the army. It would play a crucial role in solving the problem of food rations for the soldiers. With the help of some books that Yang Qindong found in the warehouse, the method of making instant noodles was listed in detail. Then came the more complicated manufacturing machine. Once the machines were available in batches, the production of finished instant noodles would be greatly accelerated. All of this work was left to the blacksmiths in the munitions factory. There was strength in numbers. After nearly half a year of various experiments, the first batch of machines finally left the factory. The moment they were distributed to the instant noodle factory, Zhou Dai and more than 3,000 employees were so excited that they shed tears. They knew that their opportunity to perform had come. He took out the wheat, oil, and other materials that he had prepared beforehand. With the help of the machine assembly line, the first batch of homemade instant noodles was finally ready. Due to all kinds of problems, the production of the first batch of instant noodles was full of twists and turns, and the machine had to be stopped from time to time. However, as long as the first step was taken, it was believed that it wouldn't be long before a more suitable second assembly line appeared, followed by a third, a fourth. In the end, instant noodles would be popularized and become an important part of the food factory. The latest news about the changes in Xi'an City would be sent to Yang Qindong every few days. Once they found that there was a deviation from the track, they would immediately correct it, and then the information would be quickly transmitted to Ryukyu Island. After 2 years of development, the Security Bureau was no longer what it used to be. Their tentacles had already involved various places, and even many countries. Just the monthly budget alone had expanded to more than 3 million taels. With so much money spent, even if such a huge organization was handed over to the Southern Ming or Beiming to manage, they would not be able to afford it financially. This was also the important reason why the Security Bureau had actually surpassed the Imperial Secret Guards and the East Faction Guards in many aspects. Of course, 3 million taels a month seemed to be a lot, but when one knew that the total number of internal and external personnel of the Security Bureau had reached 50,000, it was not so surprising. In other words, if it was implemented on each person, it would only be tens of thousands of taels of silver a month. It must be known that in order to find out useful information, these people would definitely spend a lot of money. Often, it was just a small piece of inadvertent information. If one wanted to be the first to get it, one would have to spend a lot of money and time in the early stages. In this regard, Yang Qindong had no intention of reducing the amount at all. In his eyes, the Security Bureau had not developed enough. His goal was the whole world, and he had only just touched Asia and a small part of Europe. This result naturally could not satisfy him. It could also be imagined that once one day, when they really went out, the Security Bureau would definitely be the group of people who would always be at the forefront. When they went to a new country, a new environment, at that time, the expenses would really be huge. Fortunately, with the emergence of various new factories in Xi'an City, there would be offshore ships sending out novel goods every day, and huge amounts of silver would be sent back to the island every day. This was where Yang Qindong dared to invest a lot of money. This was the advantage of a monopoly. When the things in Xi'an City became unique, when the goods they produced could not meet the demand, the power to set the price was completely in their hands. In Yang Qindong's words, it would be a waste to not earn money from foreigners. There was only a higher price, there was no limit. It was precisely because of such instructions, coupled with the existence of a group of powerful people in the upper echelons of each country, that such high-end products were constantly taken out and consumed, and there was no need to worry about not being able to sell them. Developed communication had its advantages, and being conservative also had its advantages. Just like now, because it was too difficult to communicate with other countries, Crimson City naturally rose up. It was developing in the same way every few days. At the same time, many of its disadvantages were revealed. Most importantly, its population was too small. Ryukyu Island's territory was still sufficient. At the very least, it had a population of less than 1 million, and this was after the recent kidnapping of quite a number of people and sending them to the island. Even so, compared to Taiwan's population of more than 20 million in the future, the current population was not even 1/20th of that. One could imagine just how vast this place was. Because of this, there was a large amount of land that needed people to develop and plant. Even though the first Shang dynasty in the north was still struggling at death's door and had not been completely destroyed, most of the land on the island was already under Yang Xie's control. This caused the gap in their population to be a little too large. During this period of time, in the process of dealing with the Huang bandits, many of the Ming dynasty civilians and captives had been moved over. However, there were only a few 100,000 people. Compared to the lack of manpower, there was still a huge gap. The Ming dynasty was still at its peak, and at the very least, the citizens were not completely disappointed in them. Under such circumstances, it was obviously unrealistic to ask them to leave their homes and move to the island. Under the current situation, he could not force others to do so. Otherwise, once the Southern Ming dynasty discovered his intentions, who knew what the consequences would be? After thinking about it, in order to solve the population problem on Little Ryukyu Island, Yang Chendong set his sights on the foreign races. Those who are not of my race are bound to have different intentions. This sentence had been proven to be correct in history. However, if he was only using them, then it was nothing. If they were obedient and accepted the Han culture, then they would not be hopeless. On the other hand, if they did not want to give face, then Yang Chendong did not mind creating more slaves. Some dirty and tiring jobs could be done. Wouldn't that be perfect? With such thoughts in mind, Yang Chendong's first target naturally fell on the Jiaoxi country. Once the Han people were strong, they would tuck their tails between their legs and behave themselves. Once the Han people became weak, they would be like poisonous snakes in the dark, coming up to bite them. It was truly annoying. Yang Chendong's plan for dealing with the foreign races was to directly attack, cripple them. After destroying the country, they would be thrown into chaos again. This seemed a bit cruel, and there was nothing humane about it. However, in the long run, how could this not be a solution? Pain could be exchanged for long-term stability. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. As for why others did not do this, perhaps it was because they did not have the ability to do so. Or perhaps it was because too much time had passed, and there were too many unforeseen variables. However, all of this was nothing in Yang Chendong's eyes. He had Ducheng, and everything was enough. Kuang Ye's secret memorial had been sent to Zhu Qizhen of Ying sect. Zhu Qizhen naturally praised the compromise that Jiaoxi sent out assassins. Yang Chendong's wife was attacked, and then the Duke of Loyalty and King of Min reached an agreement to send troops to deal with the Jiaoxi army. No matter what, Zhu Qizhen was the monarch of the Ming dynasty. In his view, the war with King of Min was just a family matter. Even if the Miao people participated, it was not a big deal. After all, the Miao people and the Han people had been together for many years, and they were also a part of the Ming dynasty. However, what was Jiaoxi? What was the meaning of participating in this? He had always been dissatisfied in his heart, but there was no other way. Now, Yang Chendong took the initiative to stand up and deal with them, and he only sent out the unusable ships and some iron in Sujiang Manor. No matter how he looked at it, it was worth it. After all, if Yang Chendong did not take action, who knew if Songjiang could be defended in the future? The things placed there were likely to become the spoils of war for King of Min. Who would not be willing to take these things that might not belong to them and use them to do favors and attack the opponent? Chapter 457. As for whether Yang Chendong would fight with the Jiaoxi soldiers after obtaining the item, Zhu Qizhen wasn't worried at all. Not to mention that Jiaoxi's actions would attract Yang Chendong's anger, just based on what Kuang Yi said in the secret report. Would the King of Min issue a declaration of war against Jiaoxi? Based on this, it was enough to make people feel relieved. Even though Zhu Qizhen would never admit the King of Min's status as an independent king, he would not admit that the declaration of war was legitimate. However, if the contents of the declaration of war were beneficial to him, then it was a different matter. He would just turn a blind eye to it. Since Zhu Qizhen agreed, the following matters naturally went smoothly. After the decree was issued, the southern Ming soldiers in Songjiang Prefecture began to get busy. After the decree was issued, Zhu Qizhen seemed very satisfied. Once the Jiaoxi army didn't participate, the King of Min would lose an arm. The difference in military strength between the two sides would become smaller and smaller. Once the King of Min had enough time to develop, it would not take long for the chaos in the south to be quelled. At that time, it would be time for him to consider the matter of the northern expedition. However, before this, there was also one thing that made Zhu Qizhen unhappy. That was Yang Chendong's physical condition suddenly improved. Zhu Qizhen no longer dared to underestimate Yang Chendong since the incident with Tumu. Facts had proven that his caution was correct. At the very least, everything Yang Chendong had done up until now had caused others to have a whole new level of respect for him. It was even to the extent that they had no choice but to be wary of him. Just like how Zhu Qizhen was tired of the Jiaoxi army, he was also very disgusted with Yang Chendong and the mercenaries that he could control. Zhu Qizhen didn't know what would happen if the mercenaries fought with the Jiaoji army. He also didn't want to make too many predictions because in his heart, no matter who won in the end, the remaining one might become his enemy. He had to think about how to get rid of the winning side before it was strong enough. For this matter, he called over the chief eunuch, Cao Jixiang, and the commander of the embroidered uniform guard, Meng De. These two were his absolute confidants. Furthermore, their authority was given to them by him, so there was no need to worry that they would betray him. To put it bluntly, the two of them were nothing if they left him. When the two trusted aides were called in front of Zhu Qizhen, their hearts began to beat like drums. They wondered who the emperor was going to deal with this time. Who was he going to play tricks on? They couldn't be blamed for having such thoughts. To be called to the emperor at the same time, of course, it wasn't as simple as just calling you over for a chat. Since they were on the same side, Zhu Qizhen naturally spoke more straightforwardly. You all know that Yang Chendong has recovered, right? Upon hearing this, the two of them understood and nodded. Replying to your majesty, this subject already knows. Emin, it's good that you know. He's going to lead his troops to fight against Jiaoji. This is an opportunity for you. The emperor didn't make things clear. This was perhaps a habit of his. He would never make things clear. This way, no matter what happened, they would have a lot of room to maneuver. Cao Jixiang and Meng De were both shrewd people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to reach their current positions. When they heard Zhu Qizhen's words, they understood what he meant. However, their expressions became unsightly because of this. It wasn't for any other reason. It was because it was too difficult to deal with, or rather, assassinate Yang Chendong. It wasn't as if the two of them hadn't tried before. They had even spent a lot of effort to arrange for people to get close to Yang Chendong. Disregarding everything else, just joining the mercenary army was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Even though they had already sent out what they believed to be the best of the best, and even made a lot of preparations for this. However, for some reason, it didn't take long for these people to be found and then mysteriously disappear, never to be contacted again. It was fine if it happened once or twice, but when it happened every time, as long as one wasn't an idiot, one would understand what had happened. Something had happened to the people they sent out. Of course, they didn't know that with the support of powerful silver tails, the security bureau's methods were already not inferior to the embroidered uniform guards and the East faction guards. This was especially so when Zhu Qizhen went to Nanjing to establish the Southern Ming dynasty. They had already started making arrangements. Even now, there were many people from the security bureau in the embroidered uniform guards and the East faction guards. However, because they hid too well and were generous, unless it involved some important information, they wouldn't act rashly. As a result, the security bureau didn't know the true identities of these people. Originally, they wanted to infiltrate the other party's internal department, but now, they were the ones who had infiltrated. It was really a kind of irony. Moreover, after the incident with Su Munair, even if she wanted to use a honey trap, it would be difficult for it to work. Zhu Qizhen took in their expressions and wanted to angrily scold them for being useless. However, after considering that other than them, he didn't have anyone more powerful to use. He could only suppress the anger in his heart and say, "All right, I'm not asking you to do it right now. Once the war starts, who knows how long it will take. Perhaps Yang Chendong might lose to Jiaoji, but you have to make preparations in other aspects. If there's a chance, you mustn't let it go. Do you understand?" How could the two of them not understand when he said it so bluntly? They immediately knelt down and said, "Your Majesty, please don't worry. We'll definitely do our best to solve your Majesty's problems. It's not that you have to do your best, but that there must be a good outcome." Seeing that the two of them spoke heartily but didn't have any intention of making any promises, Zhu Qizhen purposely put on a stern face, looking as if he wasn't satisfied with their answers. When it came to dealing with other officials, whether it was the embroidered uniform guards or the East faction guards, it was a piece of cake. Even if you didn't do anything wrong, it was still possible to find some things to pin on you. In fact, this was the method used. Who knew how many officials had been punished for no reason? Yang Qindong was completely different. He had an army in his hands, and it was an extremely elite army. Furthermore, he never visited the palace to meet the emperor. This made it impossible for them to find a chance to make a move. The so-called going all out just now was just empty words. Now that Zhu Qizhen had exposed them, the two of them couldn't help but blush. Fortunately, they were smart people, especially Qiao Jixiang. To be able to be placed in an important position by Zhu Qizhen and even treat him like Wang Zhen in the past, if it wasn't for his ability, he wouldn't have been able to reach such heights just by relying on his loyalty. Your Majesty, this subject has a suggestion, but I don't know if it's appropriate to say it. Qiao Jixiang knew that he had to bring out something useful today. Otherwise, the emperor wouldn't let him off easily. Sir, if you have something to say, just say it. I'm listening. Seeing that Qiao Jixiang had something to say, Zhu Qizhen immediately became interested. He wanted to see if Qiao Jixiang really had a good way to deal with Yang Qindong. Being stared at by the emperor, Qiao Jixiang first took a deep breath and quickly thought over his plan in his mind. After thinking that it was feasible, he said, Your Majesty, do you think the Prince of Min or the Duke of Zhongdan is a greater threat to the South Ming dynasty? Hearing Qiao Jixiang's question, Zhu Qizhen wanted to say that both were greater threats. However, considering that such an answer was too shameless, he thought for a while and said, Of course, I think the Duke of Zhongdan is a greater threat. After all, the Prince of Min is a member of our Zhu family. We can talk about our affairs behind closed doors. Good. This was the answer that Qiao Jixiang wanted. Striking while the iron was hot, he said, Since this is the case, this subject thinks that we can contact the Prince of Min and deal with the Duke of Zhongdan together. If he loses the battle with Jiaoji, there is nothing to say. If he wins, he is bound to come back. At that time, we will wait for them to fight until both sides are injured. When they are tired and exhausted, we will suddenly send troops. Your Majesty, what do you think the result will be? Hiss. Zhu Qizhen took a deep breath after hearing this. If an army had just finished a battle and was about to take a good rest, a stronger army would appear and target them, then the result would be obvious. If that was the case, then the overall situation would be set. The plan was good. Even Zhu Qizhen felt that it was too insidious. However, considering that everything was for the sake of the great Ming dynasty, it was understandable that the method was too extreme. But it was because of this that Zhu Qizhen had to cooperate with the Prince of Min, which made Zhu Qizhen a little unhappy. Seeing that Zhu Qizhen did not immediately express his opinion and was thinking deeply, Qiao Jixiang continued, Your Majesty, the Prince of Min and you are just family matters. Yang Qindong is really different. If we can't suppress him now, it will be more difficult to target him in the future. Once he gains power, who knows if he will be the next Wang Yuliang. His face was still very serious, but he could not help but nod first. Qiao Jixiang's words were exactly what he was worried about. It seemed that his great companion had a good sense of politics. Seeing that Zhu Qizhen did not interrupt him, Qiao Jixiang knew that he had spoken the emperor's mind. He continued proudly, Presumably, both your Majesty and the Prince of Min can see the problem of the Duke of Zhongdan. As long as we remind him a little, he will definitely do something. At that time, we can eliminate the problem in his heart and also let the Prince of Min be seriously injured in the process of killing him. It is really killing two birds with one stone. Good, good. Zhu Qizhen clapped his hands with an encouraging look. But then he shook his head, we can see this, but can the traitor Prince of Min not see it? Chapter 458. Of course. But it doesn't matter. The advanced firearms in the hands of the mercenaries are like a piece of fat meat. In order to get them, I'm afraid Prince of Min can't stop his greed. Of course, Qiao Jixiang thought of this and laughed. He was sure that Prince of Min would go to the mountain knowing that there was a tiger in the mountain. Hearing this, Zhu Qizhen nodded again. He thought it was reasonable. But there was another problem. If Prince of Min really got these advanced firearms, wouldn't it be a threat to him? When Zhu Qizhen expressed his doubts, Qiao Jixiang smiled cunningly and said, "Your Majesty, you can rest assured about this. If Prince of Min really killed Duke Zhongwei, it would be useless even if he got those firearms, because the leader of the mercenaries would be there. No one would allow their benefactor to be killed and remain indifferent." "Oh, ha ha ha." Hearing this, Zhu Qizhen finally laughed out loud. Qiao Jixiang was right. Prince of Min was such a greedy person that he would not let Yang Qindong live under his nose. Seeing that Zhu Qizhen finally laughed heartily, Qiao Jixiang knew that his plan had been approved. He struck while the iron was hot and said, "In order to lure Prince of Min into the trap, we only need to promise them that King of Shiping will block Duke of Zhongdan's retreat and prevent him from escaping once the opportunity arises. In this way, not only will our plan succeed, but if the mercenaries want to take revenge in the future, they will only look for them. Your Majesty only needs to say that you don't know anything, and then you can get rid of this matter completely." Qiao Jixiang had thought everything out for him. Zhu Qizhen had no reason to refuse. He immediately ordered Commander Menda to do this. He found a reliable person to contact Prince of Min and make preparations for the future. At the same time, he wrote a secret edict and asked someone to send it to King of Shiping of Yunnan. If Yang Qindong really defeated the Jiaoji army and returned, he would give him a fatal blow. At the same time, Prince of Min also took action. After Chen Tian returned to the camp, he told Prince of Min everything. After much consideration, Prince of Min agreed. In his eyes, both the mercenaries and the Jiaoji army were thorns in his flesh. If they could fight, it would be a good thing no matter who won. As for the 100,000 civilians that Yang Qindong requested, that was even simpler. Just pick some people who didn't have enough to eat or warm clothes and send them over. Once the war started, refugees could be seen everywhere. 100,000 people was really not a big deal. Once he did this, he would fall out with the Jiaoji army. The King of Min, who had already occupied most of Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong, had a very solid foundation. He only needed time to recruit new soldiers and digest these territories. His strength would increase by several times. At that time, he would not be afraid to face the weak southern Ming alone. King of Min made a decision, and Yingzong also responded. Finally, it was Yang Qindong's turn to make a move. Yang Qindong, who owned Daikara, had long set a goal for himself. In order to achieve these goals, the first thing he needed to do was to have power and influence. He had achieved this. The second thing was to weaken the Great Ming's strength. Then, he would openly have the power to lead his own troops. He had also achieved this. The third thing was how to lead his army to conquer the world and gain the Great Ming's tacit approval. For this step, he had put in a lot of effort. Now, it seemed that he had finally achieved it. When he received Zhu Qizhen's imperial edict from Kuang Yi that allowed him to lead the troops, the next day, 1,500 cold vanguard troops, 5,000 auxiliary troops, and 5,600 temporary auxiliary troops, a total of 12,000 men, set out from the south of Gaozhou Prefecture, brushing past Miao Jinlong's camp and heading towards Guangxi. 2 days before they left, Yang Qindong arranged for his 2 wives to leave with the last batch of soldiers from Laizhou Prefectural City. This time, they were going to fight Jiaoji. The terrain there was complicated, and there were dense forests everywhere. In some places, it would be difficult for carriages to travel. Fighting on someone else's home ground, there was the possibility of falling into danger at any time. It was naturally very inconvenient to bring the women along. However, Yang Qindong had to carefully consider where to send them. Looking carefully, whether it was the Yang clan manor near the capital or Jianghu Prefectural City, neither was a very safe place. As long as he didn't die, his family and loved ones should be safe. However, this was only under normal circumstances. Who knew if there would be people who would take the risk? After thinking about it, there was only one place that was safest, Zairyukyu Island's Crimson City. Moreover, Su Maner had already arranged for them to go there. As the saying went, an ugly daughter-in-law would have to meet her parents-in-law sooner or later. Even if he didn't tell them about Crimson City, he probably wouldn't be able to hide it from the two women for long. Since that was the case, it was better to have them go there first so that they could get used to it and think about what they would have to face after becoming his wives. Were they mentally prepared? In truth, Yang Qindong had guessed that Hu Yan and Madame Shui would probably be shocked at first, then shocked, but in the end, they would still support him. After all, women in ancient times rarely had such independent thoughts. Most of them were loyal to one person and would follow the person they married for the rest of their lives. Yang Qindong had made up his mind. However, it took him a lot of effort to arrange for the two women to go there. Just as he thought, Hu Yan and Madame Shui actually asked to face all the difficulties with Yang Qindong. The two women didn't want to leave Yang Qindong. They were more worried about him. How could he say anything harsh to women who were worried about him? Fortunately, Yang Qindong knew how to beat around the bush. He adopted the method of attacking them one by one. First, he persuaded Madame Shui. Then, the two of them worked together to deal with Hu Yan. As expected, they succeeded in the end. Using the excuse of sending them to the safest and most comfortable place, Hu Yan and Madame Shui left before the battle. Following them were Tai Qingyi, a group of female guards, and Yang Wu, who represented Yang Qindong's identity. After settling the family affairs, Yang Qindong finally set his eyes on the territory outside the Great Ming Dynasty. Only 2 days later, the army set out. In the front and back, there were 29 battalions, totaling more than 12,000 men. As they walked past Miao Jinlong's camp, the other party was like a rooster ready to fight. They put on a defensive posture. It was obvious that the previous battle had indeed frightened them. Seeing the mercenaries walk past them, they instinctively went into a defensive state. It was destined that such a defense was useless. Yang Qindong's target was not them at all. More than 12,000 people passed by the camp openly. Miao Jinlong and the others breathed a sigh of relief when they couldn't see any trace of them. Not far behind, on the city gate tower of Gaozhou, Kuang Yi could not help but sigh as he watched Yang Qindong leave with the army. He had been with Zhu Qizhen for a long time. He knew his emperor too well. He was a man who hated to see others better than him. This time, Yang Qindong went in alone. He did not know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. But at this moment, he couldn't care less because he had to leave Gaozhou Prefecture immediately. At this moment, he could only wish Yang Qindong good luck. Jiaozhi. It was also known as Jiaozhi. It was a term used by the people of the Middle Plains to describe the customs of the southern barbarians. Later on, it was used to refer to the area south of the Middle Plains where the southern barbarians lived. During the Ming Dynasty, it was also known as the Land of Annan. Emperor Qing Zhu Di once sent a large army led by Britain's Zhang Fu as the commander-in-chief to send troops to suppress Hu Jia, entering Annan and breaking Hu Jia's elephant formation. Hu Jia, father and son, were captured and escorted to the Ming Dynasty's capital Jinling, present-day Nanjing, Jiangsu, along with numerous Hu Dynasty's civil and military officials and generals. After the Huji family was destroyed, the Ming Dynasty announced the abolition of the Annan Kingdom and renamed it Jiaozhi Province. It governed 15 houses, 41 prefectures, and 210 counties. They won the war, but they made a bad move. In terms of how to rule this place, the Ming Dynasty brought a corrupt rule to the new Jiaozhi Province. The first was the local officials. Most of them came from the neighboring Guangxi, Guangdong, and Yunnan provinces. They only knew how to read, and they only had one goal: to get rich. The second was the eunuchs. Military supervisor Eunuch Ma Qi, who was the commander of the Annan military region and the grand governor of Jiaozhi province. He extorted from the people. Just the peacock tails alone required 10,000 a year. If the number was not enough, he would capture the Jiaozhi people and torture them. Wherever there was oppression, there would be resistance. In the end, a person called Li Li appeared. He worked together with the Jiaozhi people to fight against the Ming Dynasty army and obtained victory. The Ming Dynasty was forced to make peace with Li Li, and the army backed out of Jiaozhi. 1431, first month, 5th day, Li Li accepted the title of Ming Dynasty. However, this action dealt a huge blow to the authority of the central government toward the southwest chieftains. After which, Shi Duo's actions proved that the negative effects of Xuanda abandoning Jiaoji were long-term and fatal. This matter dealt a heavy blow to the Ming dynasty's international reputation in the western region and shook their suzerain status. Losing Annan meant losing the western region. This was something that even Zhu Zhangji did not expect. From then on, Annan continued to disturb the borders. Maybe because they were too poor, or maybe because they relied on their geographical advantage, once they had a chance, they would disturb the borders and bite the Ming dynasty. Every time such a thing happened, the Ming dynasty would bear with it. After all, they were facing a tropical monsoon climate, so the temperature was high and the humidity was high. It was also a country with mountains and forests, so it was inconvenient to send out troops. If they did not have enough troops, they would not be of much use. As time went on, they did not care and only arranged guards in the Yunnan, Guangxi, and Guangdong provinces near their borders to defend. As they say, if you defend for a long time, you will definitely lose. Not to mention that the Ming dynasty itself had problems. First, the strong Ming dynasty was split into two. Next, the Min king rebelled. How would Annan not grab hold of such a chance? Under the invitation of the king of Min, he reluctantly sent the troops. The 50,000 troops did help the king of Min build a lot of momentum at the beginning. Chapter 459. South Ming was already weak, and Zhu Qizhen's main focus was on Baiming. Along with the chaos of the Huang bandit army in Guangdong, the Min king worked with Jiaoji, and the Miao people suddenly attacked. Naturally, they obtained a huge victory, charging out of Yunnan and into Guangxi and Guangdong. The war was going smoothly, and Annan King Lili, who was blinded by greed, wanted more benefits. Under the instigation of his subordinates, he proposed a marriage alliance with the Min king. He wanted to marry the Min king's sister, Yongxing Infanta, and said that they would be friends for generations to come. When Lili was given the title of Annan king, he also made a vow that they would be friends for generations to come. However, not long after, he changed his mind. Naturally, the words of such a person could not be trusted. Furthermore, Lili was already over 60 years old, and Yongxing Infanta was not even 20. This was pushing his sister into a fire pit, so how could the Min king agree? However, considering that they were still an alliance army, if they did not handle this well and became enemies, it would only benefit the Yingzong emperor. It was at this moment that his subordinates came up with an idea, which resulted in the matter of Yang Chendong sending troops to attack the Jiaoji army. Especially after Yang Chendong proposed a declaration of war, he thought that he could not let Annan grow too big, and he could not marry off because of this matter. This would affect the morale of the army, and he would attract the dissatisfaction of his brothers. In the end, the Min king sent out a declaration of war, saying that the Annan king Lili was not good. This could be considered a falling out. The moment the declaration was sent out, the most shocked person was the Annan general Wan Gingwang, who was still waiting for news in Guangnan House. The surname Wan was the biggest surname in Jiaoji. With a large population, naturally, there would be more talents. Wan Gingwang was one of them. With the support of his family and his own ability, he took on the mission of leading the army. He led 50,000 troops out of Jiaoji and into Great Ming territory. They were weak to begin with, and they did not have enough preparation. The moment the Jiaoji army appeared, they caught the South Ming army off guard. Not only did they occupy the city and steal a lot of gold, but they also captured 100,000 South Ming civilians. A portion of them were sent back to Jiaoji as slaves, leaving 50,000 strong men to form the Han captive army. With that, Wan Gingwang, who had 50,000 Jiaoji troops and 50,000 Han captives, had a lot of morale. Even when he received news that the king of Min had sent someone to contact the Duke of Baiming to deal with Jiaoji, he did not take it seriously. To be able to become a general, especially one who led an army of 50,000, Wan Gingwang had some ability. In his view, strength was the most important thing. In the face of absolute strength, all schemes and machinations were nothing more than clowns dancing. It was not a big deal. Amidst this pride, a declaration of war appeared. But Wang Gengwang was only surprised. Then he was angry and a little angry. He said in front of his two confidants, Deputy General Hong Jin and his nephew Wan Yongyang, "What bullsh** T Duke of loyalty and courage. Just let him come. I will kill all of them here and see what kind of explanation King Min will give." Humph. If the compensation doesn't satisfy this general, then we'll have to talk about it. Of course. Uncle is so brave. Who can defeat you? It's fine if the Duke of Loyalty and Courage doesn't come. But if he comes, he won't be able to return. Ruan Yongyang, who looked 60 to 70% similar to Ruan Gengwang, immediately began to flatter him. It was not very accurate to say that he was flattering. At least the other Deputy General Hong Jin, who was good at war, did not object. Perhaps in his eyes, he also thought so. Feeling very comfortable with his nephew's words, Ruan Gengwang said, "Let's do it this way. Tell the army to get ready. Once the Duke of Loyalty and Courage comes, we will teach them a lesson. Let them know that they are not invincible just because they defeated the Huang bandits. In terms of military strength, we, the Jiaozhi men, are the best in the world. Mu family of Yunnan." The three big words, King of Shiping, hung high outside the Netherworld Gate, showing their strength and power. Recently, the King of Shiping, Mubin, had been living a good life. During the chaos in the south, the Mu family, who had military power and had lived here for generations, obviously became popular in everyone's eyes. Whether it was Zhu Qizhen, the King of Min, Li Li, or even Zhu Qiyu, the acting Grand Master of Baiming in the north, they all sent people to draw them to their side. This was not long after, Mu Bin was crowned as the first living king of Shiping in the Ming dynasty with a different surname. Mu Bin should have been satisfied with being crowned as a king of Shiping. This was definitely something that could be written in the history books and bring honor to his ancestors. In fact, Mu Bin did send out troops. In order to live up to the title of king of Shiping, he led 100,000 Mu family troops to fight against the king of Min. Unfortunately, he had to return in defeat because of the stupid teammates of the southern Ming dynasty. Then he could only watch the king of Min's forces go out of Yunnan and quickly occupy Guangxi and Guangdong. Now that things had come to this, Mu Bin did not have any better ideas outside of Yunnan. Because once he led the army out, what would happen if Yunnan fell into chaos? Who would be responsible for the military supplies along the way? Under all kinds of worries, Mu Bin did not make a move. Fortunately, his existence could restrain the army of the king of Min's lineage. People like the king of Guangdong, Zhu Huili, and the Miao chief of Demang village, Yang Wenba, were restrained by him in Yunnan and Guangxi, and did not dare to act rashly. It was precisely because of this that Zhu Qizhen did not openly cause trouble for Mu Bin. Although it was certain that he was not satisfied, he was too far away from the emperor. There was nothing he could do. He could not reprimand the other party and cause the Mu family to seek refuge with King Min. If that happened, the South Ming dynasty would be in real danger. In such a big environment, Mu Bin lived very comfortably. Zhu Huichen, and Yang Wenba, who knew the strength of the Mu family, did not want to fight with him. On the contrary, they would send people to send some gold and silver from time to maintain their relationship. Mu Bin did not want to accept it at first, but under Wang Ji's reminder, he finally accepted it all. Wang Ji was a very interesting person. He was originally the assistant minister of the Ministry of War of the Southern Ming dynasty and had some ability. When Kuang Yi was old and retired, he would naturally be able to smoothly fill the position. However, he was impatient and did not choose to stay put. Instead, he decided to take the initiative to make more contributions and become the minister of the Ministry of War as soon as possible. Therefore, he suggested Feng Mubin to be a king with a different surname and solve the matter of Yunnan as soon as possible. The idea was good, but the reality was cruel. In the end, the plan failed. Zhu Qizhen vented his anger on Wang Ji and asked him to be removed from his post and sent back to the capital of the southern Ming dynasty. Knowing that there would be no good result if he went back, Wang Ji began to beg Wang Mubin of Shiping, saying that he was willing to take the blame and work for him. He also promised that once the war was over, with his connections, he would be able to contact more important officials to speak for the king of Shiping when he returned to the capital with the gold and silver. Considering that his title as a king with a different surname came a little suddenly and Zhu Qizhen did not give it so willingly, who knew if he would come after him in the future? If there was someone in the capital who could speak for him and move around, it would be a good thing. In addition, the original suggestion of him being a king with a different surname came from Wang Ji himself, so Mu Bin agreed to this request. Using the excuse that Wang Ji was not well, he temporarily stayed in the Mu family. For the sake of future plans, he accepted the gold and silver sent by Prince of Min. After accepting the gold and silver, Mu Bin and Wang Ji's relationship seemed to be closer. This time, after seeing Prince of Min's declaration of war against the Jiaoji army, he called Wang Ji over and asked him about the plan. "Lord Wang, His Majesty has given me a secret order and asked me to make some preparations. Once the Duke of Loyal Courage really defeats the Jiaoji army, we should take the opportunity to suppress them. What do you think about this matter?" In the back garden of Prince of Shiping's mansion, Mu Bin and Wang Ji sat opposite each other with a humble look on their faces. Although Wang Ji had done something wrong and provoked Zhu Qizhen's anger, he still had some ability. In particular, his connections in the capital and his understanding of Yingzong's thoughts were something that Wang Ji could never catch up with. Therefore, if there was anything, Wang Ji was very willing to discuss it with this important official in the capital. Now that his life was in Mu Bin's hands, Wang Ji would answer any question, even if it was for the sake of survival. Now that he heard the question, he pondered for a moment and said, "Shiping King, there's nothing to worry about. Everything is clear. Please enlighten me, Lord Wang." Although Mu Bin already had a plan in mind, he still wanted to hear the views and opinions of the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War. Sensing the gloomy look on Mu Bin's face, Wang Ji knew that Mu Bin was trying to test him. After thinking for a while, Wang Ji smiled and said, "Prince of Shiping, the situation is clear." The emperor's decree also stated that this time, the Duke of Loyal Courage only has about 10,000 men, while Wang has gathered 100,000 soldiers. The difference in military strength is already huge. Next, one is attacking and the other is defending. One is familiar with the terrain, while the other is new here. Under such circumstances, I don't see any possibility of Wang losing. In ancient times, when fighting a war, they paid attention to the right time, the right place, and the right people. The more of these aspects, the more obvious the advantage would be, and the greater the possibility of victory would be. Looking at these aspects, it seemed that Yang Qindong only had the right to send troops, and he was at a disadvantage in all other aspects. Under such circumstances, it was no wonder that Wang Ji would make such a conclusion. Mu Bin kept nodding, looking very much in agreement. "So, this time, our target is the Jiaoji army who is going to win?" "Hey, you can't think like that." Wang Ji's expression changed instantly. "Prince of Shiping, I know you want to fulfill the emperor's decree and attack whoever wins. However, the Jiaoji army is not that easy to defeat. Let's not talk about whether or not we can win. Even if we defeat Wang, with King Li Li's temper, he will definitely send more soldiers. If that's the case, when will revenge ever end? Wouldn't we be putting ourselves in danger?" Chapter 460. Hearing that Wang Ji did not allow him to fight, Mu Bin was confused. He asked, "Then what should we do?" "Do nothing, just wait and see. Unless the Duke of Loyalty wins with a few people, we can send troops if there is a chance. Otherwise, don't act rashly. No one is easy to provoke. As long as we don't help anyone, we will be everyone's friend. In this way, when the Jiaoji army is angry, they will not find trouble with us. They will only attack the King of Min. We will sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight to preserve our strength. No matter what, we will be in an invincible position. When these words were said, it was clear that Wang Ji was indeed planning for Mu Bin. Mu Bin kept nodding his head in agreement when he heard this. Speaking of which, his Mu family had been loyal for generations. This could be seen from history. However, the current situation was completely different from history because of the appearance of Yang Qindong. There were two emperors of the Great Ming Dynasty. Both of them said that they were the legitimate ones. For a moment, Mu Bin did not know who to listen to. Under such circumstances, who should he be loyal to? Since he didn't even know what was going on, he might as well bide his time and observe the situation before making a move. Wang Ji saw that Mu Bin had stopped thinking about fighting and could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. He was now relying on Mu Bin. Of course, he hoped that Mu Bin was as strong as possible. This meant that he would be safer. However, he did not know that this time, he was completely wrong. Everything was because he underestimated the Duke of Loyalty, Yang Qindong. Perhaps Wang Ji's thinking was right. Among all the forces, Yang Qindong had less soldiers and no territory. He should be the easiest to bully. However, he forgot that if Yang Qindong was easy to bully, how could he save Zhu Qizhen from the battlefield? How was it possible for them to defeat the elite cavalry of Wutz? How could he destroy the Huang bandit army that was getting more and more powerful in less than 2 months? How could he make Bai Ming substitute Grandmaster Zhu Qiyu and Southern Ming hero Zhu Qizhen afraid? How could someone who could do such a thing be a soft persimmon that would be easily manipulated by others? If one underestimated the enemy in the business world, it was very likely that one would be penniless. However, if one underestimated the enemy on the battlefield, it could cost one's life. Just like Yang Qindong's troops, after they left Gaozhou Prefecture, they passed Lianzhou Prefecture and Saiming Prefecture. When everybody thought that he would detour around Zhen and Prefecture in the northwest and have a decisive battle with Ruangingwang's subordinates in Guangnan Prefecture, the mercenary army suddenly disappeared from everybody's sight. The mighty army of more than 10,000 people disappeared like evaporated water vapor. This news quickly spread to the South Ming Army, Min Army, Miao Army, Mu Family Army, and Jiaoji Army. Disappeared? How is this possible? Compared to the other military camps, Ruangingwang of Jiaoji military camp in Guangnan Prefecture was the most anxious one. In the past few days, he had already made preparations to fight the mercenaries outside the city. He even gave the order to not defend the city and go out to attack. Although abandoning the city and not defending it was equivalent to losing his advantage, he was still confident when he thought that his military strength was 7 to 8 times that of Yang Qindong's. However, he did not expect that after everything had been prepared, news suddenly came from the front. Yang Qindong and the mercenaries he had brought with him had disappeared. This made him feel that something was wrong. He hurriedly strode to the sand table and stared at the vicinity of Si Ming Mansion. The news had been cut off here. Naturally, his gaze would also fall on this place. Standing aside with tiger-like eyes, it was Deputy General Hong Jin. Different from Deputy General Wan Yongyang, he was the nephew of General Ruangingwang and had a natural advantage. He could only rely on diligence and better performance to gain the general's approval. Just like before, when he led the troops to fight the South Ming Empire, he performed very well. More importantly, he was very obedient. That was how he got such a position. Although Hong Jin was very obedient, he also had his own ideas. Otherwise, he could not have reached the current height with only his honesty. Under his observation, he noticed that Ruangingwang's gaze fell on the vicinity of Saiming Mansion. His heart moved, and he said, "General, could it be that those people directly entered the dense forest and entered Liang Mountain?" Hong Jin's guess was exactly what Ruangingwang was thinking. These words made his breathing quicken. At this moment, another deputy general, who was also his nephew, Wan Yongyang, fiercely stood up and said, "Impossible, they don't have the guts to enter Liang Mountain. Let's not talk about the problems of food and logistics for more than 10,000 people, just the fact that it's already the 7th month and the rainy season is coming at the right time. The weather is humid and hot, and even us locals aren't willing to stay in the mountains and forests at this time, not to mention the snakes, ants, tigers, and other creatures. Once we launch a pincer attack from the front and the right, I really don't see any way out. After saying this, Ruan Yongyang seemed to feel that it was not enough. He added, logically speaking, the loyal duke leading the troops should know this. If he doesn't even know this common sense, then I can only say that our opponents this time are too weak. They are not worthy of our attention. Ruan Yongyang's words were very reasonable. Jiaozhi was located south of the northern border. It was hot and rainy, especially from May to October, when the rain would flood. At this time, the nests of many animals in the dense forest were not safe, causing them to roam everywhere. It was very dangerous. The reason why it was said to be very dangerous was that unless it was a particularly experienced local elder, not many people would be willing to enter the dense forest under such conditions. It was not much different from rushing through the gates of hell. Not to mention an army of more than 10,000 people. Once they entered without knowing anything, anything could happen. If they did not handle it well, it was normal to lose 60 to 70% of their non-combat personnel. In addition, without enough logistical support, no army would take the initiative to enter the mountain. It was precisely because of this harsh environment that Jiaozhi was able to remain independent despite its small population and small army. Its overall strength was far inferior to the Great Ming Dynasty. Hearing Ruan Yongyang say so much in one breath, General Ruan Gingwang nodded repeatedly. Just when the other generals thought that he was thinking the same, he suddenly said to his deputy general, Hong Jin, immediately arrange for scouts to enter the Langshan area and search for possible traces and evidence of their entry. The sudden decision stunned the other generals. After hearing this, Hong Jin's body instantly stiffened and he said, "Yes, General. This subordinate will do it immediately." After Hong Jin went out to arrange things, Ruan Yongyang, who was in the hall, said in a questioning tone, "Uncle, you don't really think that these mercenaries are brave enough to enter the forest, right? If that's the case, we don't even need to do anything. Most of them will die in there. Call me General. Also, I am the Commander-in-Chief here. I naturally know what to do," Ruan Gingwang reminded. Ruan Gingwang said in a warning tone. Ruan Yongyang's mouth, which had originally wanted to say something else, was now half open. Clearly, his uncle was angry. When the main general was angry, even if you were his son, you would have to restrain yourself. This was the army. Without iron-like military discipline, there would be no way to win any battles. As for Hong Jin, he immediately sent out a team of 200 elite scouts to Langshan. Most of them had lived in the forest for generations, and many of them frequently went in and out of Langshan. Arranging for them to scout for information was the most appropriate thing to do. Go and return quickly. If you discover anything suspicious, report back immediately. This time, we don't need you to find out where the enemy is. As long as you can confirm that they have entered the Langsun region, it will be a great achievement." Hong Jin gave the order to the scouts. Following this, 200 horses galloped out and disappeared without a trace. Langshan. This forest had a long history. If one had to describe it, it could be described as a primeval forest. Especially now that it had not been developed and polluted, the number of mountains and forests and the density of the trees was unimaginable to ordinary people. For example, if one walked in this forest, regardless of whether it was day or night, unless one found a favorable position, it would be very difficult to see the sun. This was all because the density of the trees was too high. It was so high that it could completely block out the sun. Another example would be walking for tens of meters, at most 100 meters. In less than 10 meters, one could see thick tree trunks that were so thick that even two people couldn't wrap their arms around them. There were even thicker ones that were so thick that even 3 or 4 people's arms wouldn't be able to wrap around them. There were also many trees like this. From this, one could see how desolate and primeval this place was. When Yang Chendong led more than 12,000 mercenaries into this forest, he saw such a scene. "Oh, the forest here is much denser than the ones we encountered during training. The trees are also much thicker." Not long after entering, Tiger's Mane's voice rang in Yang Chendong's ears. On the other side, Beta Persei also cooperated with him. Young master, the road here is muddy, and the temperature is so high. Not everyone can stay here. I finally understand your painstaking efforts a while ago. It was no wonder that Beta Persei would say this at this time. A while ago, Yang Chendong had not seen outsiders for a long time on the grounds that he was poisoned by an assassin. In fact, he had been secretly training the army. The main subject of the training was how to survive in the forest and how to best exert one's strength. At that time, many mid-level officers, low-level officers, and even some higher-level officers did not understand this kind of training. Especially during training, Yang Chendong deliberately chose some rainy weather and when the temperature was high to increase the intensity of the training. For this reason, many soldiers were injured. There were even some auxiliary soldiers who could not persevere at all and were directly injured and retired from active service. Chapter 461. They hadn't even seen a single enemy, yet they were already losing members. This was because Yang Chendong's prestige was high enough. If it were anyone else, even the two most senior division commanders, Ling Song and Gao Xiong, wouldn't be able to hold the fort. At that time, people didn't understand, but now that they were in such an environment, everyone finally understood. They finally understood the painstaking efforts of the sixth young master, and they admired the vision of the sixth young master. Just like now, they were clearly in a very unfamiliar environment, and it was raining outside, and the weather was very humid. If it was the Southern Ming army, not many people would be able to endure it, and losing people would be inevitable. However, in front of the Yang family army, it was nothing at all. Everyone just felt that they had returned to their previous training, and some of them were even more ambitious. They didn't treat this place as a battlefield at all, but as an ordinary training. It was because of this foundation that Yang Chendong dared to risk universal condemnation and suddenly enter the Langshan area, making everyone who wanted to watch a show miss it. The Security Bureau was indeed a department with a lot of money. For example, the news that Ing Zong and Min Wang wanted to take advantage of the situation when the mercenaries and the Jiaoji army were both injured was already sent to Yang Chendong when he was on the road. In front of him was an opponent who was 7 to 8 times stronger than him, and there were 2 enemies who were waiting to ambush him. Anyone who encountered such a situation would be confused and feel helpless. In Yang Chendong's case, he just casually changed the route of the army. Or it could be said that he had only entered Liangshan according to the original plan. He had completely disrupted the military plans in the Yunnan region, causing the enemy to be at a loss of what to do. That's right. Entering the Langshan area was one of the military steps that Yang Chendong had planned for a long time. In the territory of the Han people, especially under the watchful eyes of several parties, Yang Chendong felt like he was bare-chested for others to see. It was very uncomfortable, and he couldn't use his full strength to display his means. After all, his forces were the weakest at the moment. If his performance was too stunning, it would inevitably give all his enemies a sense of invincibility. Once they had such a feeling, who knew if they would join forces to attack him? If that was the case, wouldn't it be too dangerous? After all, he only had an army of about 10,000 people. As for how to conceal themselves, or rather, how to attract the attention of others, that was the most important problem. This was the reason why they decided to enter Langsun. Jiaoji was a foreign race, and history had proven that the people living here no longer viewed themselves as subordinates of the Han, regardless of whether they chose to submit to or rebel against the Han in the future due to the strength of the Han. On the contrary, they would be like an annoying poisonous snake, wanting to take a bite whenever they had the chance. Facing these non-humankind beings who had no standpoint, no principles, and no bottom line, Yang Chendong wouldn't try to persuade them with emotions and reason like the other emperors. Instead, he would directly devour them, destroy them, and achieve his goal of destroying the nation. That was to destroy the country. Speaking of which, it was quite scary. At least in the future, without a strong reason, even the United States, which was the strongest in military, would not dare to do this. Even if they did, there would be a lot of trouble, and they would have no choice but to help one up and fight the other. It would be amazing if they could achieve the goal of being temporarily obedient. As for the Han, they didn't even think about it. Perhaps this had something to do with the Confucian doctrine of the mean, and the many years of inheritance. Even if they had the strength to destroy you, they wouldn't choose to do so. But what year was it now? It was 1451 AD. At this time, people were short-sighted, and they only cared about what they could see. They wouldn't even care about what was further away. This kind of environment where they only cared about their own family affairs was the best opportunity for Yang Chendong to achieve his goal. Putting everything else aside, Yang Chendong could wipe out a foreign race like the Jiaoji without worrying about the condemnation of other countries. In such an environment, if Yang Chendong was still bent on forcing them to submit, he would be pedantic and would truly be harming the country and the race. It was precisely because he had the intention to destroy the country that the trip to Mount Liang wasn't so abrupt. Once they entered Langsun, they could make use of the dense forest to reach the inner parts of Jiaoji. If they were able to move quickly, they might even be able to reach Hanoi, the capital of Jiaoji. This was also the reason why the army had entered Langsun. He could hide himself, make others' plans to target him completely fail, and even achieve his ultimate military goal. With so many benefits, why wouldn't he do it? As for whether or not he would feel uncomfortable after entering the forest, did he really think that the targeted training was for nothing? The most annoying thing in the dense forest was nothing more than the rainy weather and the poisonous insects that could appear everywhere. The former wasn't difficult to deal with. As mentioned earlier, the trees here were lush, and with so many leaves, the rain wouldn't easily fall on the warriors. At most, the path under their feet would be a little muddy. However, the latter was even less of a problem. Everyone had a pair of combat boots, and that solved all their problems. Not only did the path not seem so difficult to walk on, but with the combat boots, even snakes and insects wouldn't be able to do anything to them. For example, when marching in the wild, especially in a dense forest like this, one must pay attention to the cleanliness of the camp, and all trash must be buried in a timely manner. That was because as long as there was a bit of grease, there was a possibility of attracting ants, and ants would attract lizards, and lizards would attract snakes. When moving around in areas where snakes roamed, one must pay attention to reduce the possibility of being bitten by snakes. Generally, 70% of the bites would be on the feet. If one wore trousers, forest boots, and combat boots, even if one was bitten, one wouldn't be poisoned. Thinking about what people wore in the past, most of them were straw sandals and cloth shoes. Occasionally, some nobles would wear cloth boots, but in front of real combat boots, those were nothing. That was also the reason why the mercenaries dared to casually enter the forest while others viewed it as a dangerous place. As for whether there were poisonous snakes on the trees in the dense forest. When camping in the wild, some lime powder should be scattered around the area to prevent poisonous snakes from invading. Before sleeping, the bed should be checked, the tent should be pressed, and the shoes should be checked in the morning. If these were done, there would be no need to worry. And this knowledge was known by some local people, not to mention Yang Chendong, who came from the army in the future, was even more clear about these things. Long before they decided to enter Langsun, Resin City had already prepared enough combat boots, lime powder, and even some anti-mosquito medicine, as well as food like instant noodles and ham sausages. With sufficient preparations, food and clothing were no longer a problem. The next problem was how to kill the enemy. As for how to effectively kill the enemy, Yang Chendong had already made sufficient preparations and plans. Modern armies emphasized on fighting even when there was no war. This meant that even when there was no war, they had to make sufficient preparations to deal with it. What should they do when war came? Even when there was no war, they had to make preparations all the time, much less when war was about to break out. Yang Chendong had already summoned the 2 regiment commanders and the battalion commanders of the Cold Front to discuss the next battle plan. When they were in Gaozhou, they had already made the final decision. Faced with the Jiaoji army that greatly outnumbered them, they would adopt the plan of luring the enemy deep into their territory and nibbling away at them step by step to achieve their goal. The so-called luring the enemy deep into their territory referred to how to lure the enemy out of Lang's sun and then take a vicious bite out of them first. It was a rather daring plan. This was already the territory of the Jiaoji army. Luring the enemy out of their territory and then dealing a heavy blow to them was probably something only Yang Chendong dared to do. Only the elites of the Cold Front could accomplish such a feat. If it was the Southern Ming army, they might not have the courage to make such a decision. Even if they could, they would not be able to accomplish it. However, this was not a problem for the Yang Jejun. This time, after entering the Southern Ming territory, the mercenaries had won every battle. As long as they were willing, there was no enemy that could withstand a single blow from them. Under such an atmosphere, the morale of the army soared. The morale of the army could be used. In addition, after the previous battle with Miao Jun, Yang Chendong had completely given up on cold weapons and switched to firearms. Now, even the auxiliary soldiers were equipped with Type 81 rifles. Even the temporary auxiliary soldiers were using crossbows that were swapped out from the auxiliary soldiers. This only boosted the morale of the army. It was not an exaggeration to say that with these weapons, it was equivalent to winning half of the battle. Just think about it, with the current weapons of the army, even if it was during the anti-Japanese era, they could easily turn the situation around, not to mention the Ming dynasty from a few hundred years ago. There was even less chance of failure. It was because of this morale that the Yang family's army entered the Lang Sun region. They immediately began to make arrangements according to their previous plan. First, they chose a spacious battlefield and buried the enemy's bones there. Then, they began to bury mines nearby. The construction of the first mine took the Red Nest City munitions factory a total of 9 months. This was because they already knew about gunpowder and the theory behind mines. However, mines were still too advanced at that time, so much so that it exceeded the imagination of humans at that time. But in any case, with enough scientific evidence and a real object as a reference, after 9 months, the first landmine was finally successfully produced after countless tests. With the first mine, the speed of production began to increase. This was originally not a difficult matter. As long as there was enough gunpowder and other materials, the mines were produced in batches and sent to the seaside of Liezhou Prefecture by the Yangtze Navy. They were sent to Yang Chendong's military camp. Chapter 462. This time, when they set off, each soldier carried a total of 3 landmines. This was because the landmines were still too large. Once the munitions factory in Crimson City made a breakthrough, the landmines would be reduced in size, allowing the soldiers to carry more. 3 per person. Even if some people wanted to take others, without mines, 10,000 soldiers would have at least 20,000 of them. What kind of power would they be able to unleash if that was the case? When they found a suitable ambush spot, Yang Chendong waved his hand and placed 10,000 landmines. Half of the total amount was enough to intimidate the Jiaoji army and give them a good start. The landmines were still being set up when the scouts from Lingfen reported that they had discovered the Jiaoji army scouts and asked if they should eliminate them on the spot. The scouts were all elites, and any one of them was more than enough to take on the previous squad leader of Cold Front. In addition, they were already equipped with silencers, night vision goggles, and other devices. They could really eliminate opponents from hundreds of meters away without leaving a trace. It was no wonder they were so arrogant when they came to ask for instructions. Ignore them. Let the army find a place to set up camp and start cooking, Yang Chendong said nonchalantly. Not only did he have no intention of hiding, he even ordered his men to start a fire. This was an intentional exposure. Why did Yang Chendong suddenly enter the Lang Sun area? It was to give them time to plant the landmines. Since the work had already started, it would be completed soon. The next mission was to lure the enemy over. He could use the Jiaoji scouts to expose his location. Once the order was given, the originally quiet forest was suddenly filled with smoke and fire. This time, not to mention the elite scouts Hong Jin had sent, even ordinary people would know what was going on as long as they weren't blind. The mercenaries are indeed here. Quick, go back and report this to General Hong. The rest of you, keep a close eye on this area and find out where their base is located." The scout general excitedly ordered his subordinates when he saw that there was a result of his investigation. Someone went back to report. The other scouts started to approach the central area carefully. They thought they were being very careful, but they didn't know that their every action, including eating, drinking, and defecating, were all seen by the scouts from Lungfeng. These scouts were either hiding in the dense trees or digging bunkers on the ground that were big enough for them to hide. Then, they used binoculars and night vision goggles to observe the enemy's every move. They would then use hand signals to report to the nearby scouts. Yang Chendong had already given the order that once the scouts were discovered, they could fire back to protect themselves. As for whether or not this would alert the enemy, he was not worried at all. From Yang Chendong's point of view, if the enemy appeared in this area, it would be abnormal if they didn't react at all. That would attract the enemy's suspicion. However, it was precisely because of this order that the scouts of the Cold Vanguard began to have some ideas. Especially when they realized that the Cochin scouts could not detect their presence, some of the warriors who were itching for a fight decided to reveal their whereabouts. Then, 1 against 3, 1 against 4, or even 1 against 5, and retreated unscathed from time to time. In less than a day, they had killed close to 100 Jiaoji scouts, causing the enemy to lose half of their men. This not only frightened the scout general of the Jiaoji army, it also scared the platoon leader of the Lengfeng platoon. The 6th young master's intention was to lure these scouts to the side of the ambush. If they killed all of them, who would lure them into the ambush? For this reason, the platoon leader gave a military order. Unless they were discovered and their lives were in danger, no soldiers were allowed to expose themselves. Once they were discovered, they would be disqualified from Lengfeng according to the military rules. Once the war ended, they would be sent back to develop Qiqian City. Although developing Crimson City was also glorious, and the benefits were also very generous, how could it be more satisfying than fighting on the battlefield with real swords and spears? After the order was given, the scouts finally became obedient. Only then did the Jiaoji scouts continue to move deeper into the mercenary camp. Just when they thought that the enemy's morale was weak and couldn't pose a threat to them, they didn't know that they were only able to enter because the enemy went easy on them. There was nothing to write about the battle between the scouts and the Jiaoji scouts. At most, they only lost 100 men, which was nothing in the eyes of the mercenaries. Even the auxiliary soldiers and temporary auxiliary soldiers had killed far more enemies. Killing 100 men wasn't something to brag about. As for the Jiaoji scouts who were sent to deliver the message, they hurried back as fast as they could. By the time they arrived at Guangnan Prefecture, some of the horses had already died from exhaustion. The news that the mercenaries had indeed entered Lang Mountain and were discovered by the scouts was also delivered to Hong Jin. Hong Jin was very excited when he heard the news. He immediately went to see General Wang Genwang. Then, he looked at the general eagerly, waiting for the order to attack. They really don't know what's good for them. However, they probably don't know that we discovered their intentions so quickly. Since that's the case, it's a waste not to eat this fat meat that's delivered to our doorstep. Where's Ruan Yongyang? Looking at the report Hong Jin sent over, Ruan Genwang's lips curled into a cold smile. Then, he asked in a thunderous voice. Ruan Yongyang, who was in his 20s, was also standing below. He was staring at his uncle's figure. He had made a mistake in his previous strategy and regretted it very much. Now, he was most afraid that Ruan Genwang would give the mission of exterminating the enemy to Hong Jin. If that was the case, then he would lose a great opportunity to perform meritorious deeds. Fortunately, his uncle was still his uncle. At the crucial moment, he didn't forget his family. When he heard Ruan Genwang shouting his name, he quickly reacted and stepped forward. This general, Ruan Yongyang, listens to your orders. Ruan Yongyang, this general orders you to bring 30,000 soldiers. 20,000 of them are Jiaoji elites and 10,000 Han captives into Lang Mountain. Find the mercenaries and surround them to show the might of our Jiaoji army. When Ruan Genwang finished speaking, Ruan Yongyang immediately cupped his fists and said, "General, please rest assured. I will make the preparations now. Within a day, no. Within half a day, the army will be able to leave the city. At most, it will take 2 days to reach Lang Mountain. 5 days later, there will be good news." One could not blame Wan Yongyang for being so anxious. He was afraid that the mercenaries would continue to venture deeper into Lang's Sun. If they were allowed to enter the inner region, even if they could be eliminated there, it would still alarm the emperor, wouldn't it? If that was the case, then this battle wouldn't be perfect. Hearing Wan Yongyang's confidence and the fact that he had already prepared everything, Wan Gingwang nodded in satisfaction. "Good, go and make the arrangements." This general obeys. Wan Yongyang turned around and left with a face full of joy. Hong Jin, who had come to deliver the news, had a face full of envy. Of course, if he knew that Wan Yongyang wouldn't return this time, he wouldn't be envious. He would be glad that he wasn't General Wan Gingwang's family. Otherwise, he would be the unlucky one. Of course, this also proved that in the ancient army, relationships and family were very important. If you didn't have a strong relationship, no matter how outstanding you were, it would be difficult for you to make a name for yourself. In fact, this had always been the case since ancient times. In comparison, it was very difficult for the capable to rise above the mediocre in the cold front. One shouldn't think that everything would go smoothly once they joined the cold front. Ordinary members of the cold front would undergo periodic assessments. Once they found that their physical fitness couldn't keep up, they would be forced to leave the cold front. It was the same for the officers. It didn't matter if you were a platoon leader, company commander, battalion commander, or even a regiment commander or division commander. Once they found that you couldn't keep up with the development of the army, they would be removed. The only difference was that after you retired, you would be given a suitable arrangement. You could be assigned to the logistics of the army or be assigned to the development of the region. This way, even if you were to leave the cold front, you would still have a guarantee. This way, the officers and soldiers wouldn't have to worry. However, because of this kind of military discipline, the overall fitness of the cold front was constantly improving. Their physical fitness was always at its peak, which ensured that they were undefeatable and invincible. Wan Yongyang's order was sent out, and it was just as he had promised. The army quickly began to gather. The Jiaozhi army, which was already prepared to fight the mercenaries, quickly gathered 30,000 soldiers and marched out of Zhen and prefecture, heading straight for Lang's Sun. The news quickly reached Yang Qindong's ears in Lang's Sun. When he heard that the enemy had taken the bait, he couldn't help but chuckle. "They're here so soon. Very good, very good." After saying "very good" twice, Yang Qindong couldn't help but sigh. Beta Persei saw this and asked in confusion, "Young master, why are you sighing?" "Beta Persei, why do you think the Jiaozhi army sent 30,000 people this time? I've prepared 10,000 landmines for them. Isn't it a little overkill?" Yang Qindong said with a look of pity. When Beta Persei heard this, he nodded seriously. "Young master, you're right. Why don't we dig out more landmines? Let's not waste them." This. Yang Qindong despised Beta Persei in his heart. "Young master, I was just sighing proudly. Why are you so serious? There's no need for that. Anyway, the military factory is rushing to produce more landmines. For the sake of the soldiers' safety, let's just waste some." Chapter 463. Sigh, young master's words make sense. After hearing this, Beta Persei nodded his head heavily, as if this was how it should be. This was the charm of a leader. In the eyes of many people, especially those who had seen the development of Crimson City, Yang Qindong had already become a synonym for omnipotence. Under intentional rumors, many people even began to view him as a godlike figure. Since he was a god, it was normal for him to create things that people could not even imagine. Since he was a god, the things he said and the decisions he made were all correct. Since he was a god, how could Beta Persei oppose him? The two of them seemed to be talking about an extremely ordinary matter. However, if these words were heard by outsiders, especially by their current opponent, the Jiaoji army, many of them would probably vomit blood before even starting a fight. What, we send out 30,000 soldiers, 3 times more than you, and you're complaining that we send out too few soldiers? Even if you're looking down on us, you don't have to look down on us like this. Liang Mountain. This place, which seemed extremely bad to outsiders, at least, this was what the Great Ming army thought, was currently bustling with noise and excitement. Following the sudden appearance of the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers, many of the surrounding birds and insects were scared away. Only the light rain continued to fall from the sky. To the Jiaoji soldiers who lived in this area all year round, this kind of weather was a common sight. It was precisely because of this that when the army arrived outside Liang Mountain, they only ate a hot meal before moving into the mountain. As the main commander, Ruan Yongyang was so anxious because he was afraid that the mercenaries would suddenly leave and disappear without a trace. If that was the case, it would be quite difficult to find the other party's tracks in the dense forest. Fortunately, the scout general had reported that the mercenaries did not leave. However, from the looks of it, they seemed to be packing up their tents and preparing to leave. We can't let them go. Hearing that the mercenaries were about to leave, Ruan Yongyang became anxious. Between a stationary army and a roaming army, which one was easier to attack, he couldn't be any more clear. Although it was easier to attack a roaming army, it was also easier to let the enemy escape. Once the enemy was in disarray, how could he capture them in this dense forest? Just defeating the mercenaries was no longer Ruan Yongyang's goal. This time, he wanted to completely annihilate his opponents, so that he could better show off his ability. In order to achieve this goal, he naturally couldn't allow the mercenaries to be active. Since he had decided to wipe out the mercenaries, it was better to act as quickly as possible. Just like that, the 30,000 Jiaoji soldiers who had just eaten a hot meal sped towards the depths of Langshan district. They wanted to surround the mercenaries before they could react and catch them off guard. Ruan Yongyang's military order was passed down. All he did was say a few words, but the Jiaoji soldiers were the ones suffering. After leaving Guangnan Prefecture, they almost didn't stop for a rest. Instead, they had been traveling at full speed. They originally thought that they would have time to rest after reaching the outskirts of Langshan district. Who knew that another military order would be passed down, forcing the army to continue on their journey? With such speed, the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers could barely keep up. After all, the Jiaoji soldiers who were allowed to leave the country to fight were all specially selected to display the might of the Jiaoji army. However, the 10,000 Han captives were clearly inferior. Relying on the fact that the Ming dynasty was still in its heyday, these people's foundations were not bad. They were not so skinny that they looked like they were just skin and bones. However, it was impossible to say that their bodies were strong. Most of them were people with sallow faces and muscles. Especially after becoming Han captives, one could tell how much they were looked down upon just by hearing their name. Otherwise, why would they be called captives? The people who surrendered had no dignity. They always ate the worst, wore the worst, used the worst, and lived the worst. Take the straw sandals on their feet for example. They had been wearing them for who knows how long. The slightly better ones, or the ones that their wives made for them, had long been snatched away by the Jiaoji soldiers. In the end, they were given the ones that were about to break or were already broken. They could only continue to use them after some simple repairs. Then there were the weapons they used. Calling them weapons was a bit of an exaggeration. Most of them were broken and rusted farm tools. For example, iron rakes, hoes, and other such tools. Speaking of which, they couldn't be blamed. In the Great Ming Dynasty, steel was a forbidden item. The commoners were not allowed to own it. Once discovered, it would be a serious crime. In addition, their master, the Jiaoji, was terrifyingly poor. How could they be provided with any good weapons? Even the iron blades and spears of the real Jiaoji soldiers were relatively low in iron. At the very least, it was below average. The Han captives, who didn't have anything, now had to continue on their journey. Their morale had long wavered. If not for the fact that the Jiaoji soldiers were constantly patrolling and monitoring them, there would have been many deserters. Not to mention their equipment and morale. No one dared to disobey Ruan Yeyang's orders. They braced themselves and charged into the rainforest of Mount Liang. They followed the direction of the scouts and rushed towards the camp of the mercenaries. Compared to the Jiaoji and Han captives who rushed over, the mercenaries who had been here for close to 3 days were calm and unruffled. Many of them even had a good night's sleep. After entering Mount Liang, half of the first day was spent on the journey. The remaining day was spent on setting up camp and burying mines. When all these things were done, only 2 days had passed. The next half of the day was spent sleeping. After waking up, it was time to eat. After eating, it was time to go back to sleep. Using Yang Chendong's words, if one didn't have enough energy and stamina, how could one fight a war? For a time, the aroma of meat wafted through the camp. This way of eating their fill made all the Leng Feng soldiers, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers satisfied their cravings. Yang Chendong also said that this was the last hot meal before they found a new base. In the following days, they would have to eat cold food as much as possible. Even if they could start a fire, it was still a form of restraint. Therefore, if they wanted to eat, they had to hurry. Otherwise, who knew when they would be able to get another chance? Even though they said so, none of the soldiers were really going to eat to death. Not to mention that they were used to eating after entering the Yang family army. Even the temporary soldiers did not crave meat as much as before. Even if they could not start a fire to eat hot food, the meals of the mercenaries were still extremely good. For example, the staple food was instant noodles. Other than that, there were several types of chicken and pork sausages. Even the canned food that everyone brought with them tasted pretty good. There were canned pork knuckles, preserved vegetables with meat for happiness meatballs, mushroom meat sauce, sweet and sour pork ribs, braised pork and so on. There were also luncheon meats and various canned fruits. It was really thirst-quenching and more importantly, it could keep them hungry. Such good food was something that many of the temporary soldiers did not even dare to think about in the past. Now, they only treated it as ordinary military supplies. Many of them were surprised, but they kept these things well. Every time they woke up, the first thing they did was not to check where they put their weapons, but to check if the good food was still there and whether it had been taken away by others. These people were really afraid of being poor. For people who were afraid of being poor, food was always the most important thing. At the last moment, they might not bring anything, but the food that could save their lives would always be there. Yang Chendong grasped the mentality of these people and put food security as the first priority. He believed that as long as the soldiers had enough food, they would have the spirit to fight in the war. In order to live a good life without worrying about starvation in the future, how could they not fight with all their might on the battlefield? In addition to their advanced weapons and hard work during training, they were naturally successful on the battlefield. That's right, don't think that you are invincible with advanced weapons. Sufficient morale and fighting spirit, as well as transparent rewards and punishments, were the greatest motivators. Otherwise, how could the United States, which had such powerful weapons and equipment, lose the war on the Korean battlefield? This was the reason why the ideological work was not done well. With so much experience, Yang Chendong had originally received such professional training and had been doing it for so many years. He only needed to move over and use it to lay the foundation for his victory. Just like on the eve of the great battle, when the scouts at the front reported that the 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers and 10,000 Han captive soldiers were rushing toward the camp, no one was afraid of the approaching battle, whether it was the cold front, the auxiliary soldiers, or the temporary auxiliary soldiers. The cold front soldiers were well trained and well equipped, so they naturally did not feel the slightest bit of fear. In addition, they knew that the sixth young master was fully prepared this time. Right now, they only needed to rest up and get up to wipe their hands after they had enough sleep. This way, their hearts would be calm and they would have the pearl of wisdom in their hands. This time, the auxiliary soldiers were all equipped with Type 81 assault rifles, which increased their confidence. They could not wait to have a chance to perform well. When they heard that the enemy was coming, not only were they not afraid, but they were also very excited. They were waiting for the enemy to arrive so that they could perform well. The temporary auxiliary soldiers also wanted to perform well. They were also waiting for a chance to perform well. However, they had only been in the army for a short time, and they were using cold weapons like crossbows, so they were not very confident. Chapter 464. I say, Daniel, don't be so nervous. If you can kill one enemy on the battlefield, it's enough. If you kill two, you'll earn one. At most, you'll die once. After 18 years, you'll be a hero again, that's right. Daniel, little dog, as long as you follow the usual training method, you should be fine. Even if you die, there will be people who will remember us and send you off. That's called dying with dignity and dying with value. That's right. Haven't we already asked the squad leaders who know how to write our last words? If we really die, as long as our family members are still alive, no matter where they wander, they will have a chance to be found and taken care of. If that's the case, what's there to be afraid of? This was the scene when a few temporary auxiliary soldiers gathered together. Not far away, the leader of the 10-man squad, who was also the squad leader of the auxiliary soldiers, looked at what was happening. However, he didn't have the slightest intention to stop it. When one was really on the battlefield, there were some things that needed to be enlightened by others. However, most of the time, it was better to think it through by oneself. Since that was the case, it was better to watch them comfort each other and relieve each other's pressure. Sure enough, after being enlightened by the other brothers who called themselves comrades, Daniel and Xiao Go, who were originally a little nervous and even trembling, were no longer so scared. Their eyes also became brighter and brighter, and even brighter. Just like what the other comrade said, since they became soldiers, they would be on the battlefield and there would be life and death. If they thought it through, why should they be afraid of death? Not to mention that if something really happened to them, the Duke of Loyalty of the Great Ming Dynasty had already promised them that he would try his best to find their family members and then bring them to a very beautiful world where they could live happily. When they thought that whether they performed a meritorious service or died in battle, the outcome was not bad. They even had a chance to obtain a better reputation. So why not fight and take the risk? After being enlightened, the two of them became spirited. Unknowingly, the friendship between the soldiers in the same squad became deeper and deeper. This kind of thing didn't only happen in this squad. In the entire 14 battalions, at least half of the 5,600 temporary auxiliary soldiers had experienced this. Under the encouragement of the other comrades, their fear of war was resolved. Their fighting spirit began to condense and sublimate, turning into a strong morale that was waiting for the arrival of the war. The war was indeed about to begin. The 10,000 Jiaoji soldiers were the first to arrive, and the remaining 10,000 Han captives arrived 5 kilometers away from the mercenary camp 4 hours later. Order the entire army to surround them. First, form an effective encirclement. Then, take advantage of the fact that it's not dark yet, charge down. Ruan Yongyang, who had already surveyed the surrounding terrain, issued a military order to his Kiliarchs. General, the army is too tired from the journey. Why don't we have a good night's rest and fight again tomorrow? Out of sympathy for the soldiers, a Chiliarch spoke to Ruan Yongyang, whose eyes were shining. He. After Ruan Yongyang sneered, he said, haven't you heard that speed is crucial in war? Since even you think that our army should take a good rest, I presume that the enemy will also think the same. If we suddenly attack at this time, it will definitely be very effective. We will definitely be able to catch them off guard. Alright, do as I say. However, if anyone dares to question me, they will be punished according to military law. This battle was definitely a great opportunity for Ruan Yongyang to perform meritorious deeds. Especially since the weather was still good today. The originally light rain had already stopped at noon. Without the obstruction of the rain, this was the best opportunity for the army to attack. If they could take down the mercenary army in one go, it would be a great achievement. However, if they were to rest, who knew what would happen? Since Ruan Yongyang had already made such arrangements, the Kiliarchs did not dare to question him. They immediately cupped their fists and went to prepare. The general had only given them an hour to prepare. During this time, they still needed to rush to their respective positions. It was truly too nerve-wracking. What? Someone said that the soldiers were hungry from the journey. Shouldn't they eat some hot food before fighting? Hee, forget it. Once they are full, what if they don't want to move anymore? In any case, everyone had been given a certain amount of rations before they came. Although the rations should have dried up by now, with the rain that had just fallen from the roadside, they should still be able to swallow it. They would celebrate after they won the battle. Yes, when the army was marching to war, there were not so many rules. Especially in ancient times, not everyone could be equipped with something like a water bag. At the very least, one had to be a sergeant and above. When the soldiers were thirsty, they would just find a stream or even a ditch by the roadside and drink it. Feel dirty? That's because you are not thirsty. Feel unhygienic? Sorry, the people of that time did not think so much. It was precisely because of these bad habits that the number of soldiers in the army was often very high. The combat strength of the army was also greatly weakened because of this. Fortunately, this kind of thing would not happen to the young Jejun. The food they ate was both nutritious and safe, and the water they drank was both warm and cold. Even if the war lasted for too long and the conditions were not good enough, the military regulations still required everyone to drink flowing water or directly catch rainwater to drink. Drinking the stinky water in the ditch was absolutely forbidden. Because of this, there were soldiers who broke the rules and were given a good beating in front of everyone. They were also beaten 5 times with the killing rod. Their skin was really lacerated and their flesh was lacerated. The beatings were ruthless and the results were good. Very quickly, everyone remembered this matter and no one broke it again. It had to be said that there were times when strict military regulations had its benefits. After all, some people liked this kind of thing. Furthermore, Ruan Yenyang had already given the order to end the battle quickly. In his opinion, he had 20,000 soldiers and suddenly appeared in a situation where they were surrounded. Facing 10,000 people, no matter what, victory was already in his hands. After all, in a war, the side that initiated the attack would more or less have the upper hand and hold the initiative. The Jiaoji army started to move. This scene was seen clearly by the scouts who were lying in ambush. These scouts were the most outstanding batch of people in the disguise test. As such, the hiding spots they found were very well hidden. For example, when Ruan Yenyang gave the order, there was a scout lying in ambush on a hill 100 meters away from them. The scout squad leader named Su Yunsheng was also a daring person. The reason he chose such a position was to observe the situation on the front line better. For this, he paid a price. For example, a few Jiaoji soldiers once poured urine on the spot where he was lying in ambush. When the hot liquid flowed down from the sky, Su Zhangxing did not close his eyes. Instead, he allowed the liquid to flow on his body. He endured it. It was this kind of perseverance that prepared him for the great merit he was about to perform. Ruan Yiyang didn't know about this. He only saw that victory was waving at him. Especially when the scouts came to report that the mercenary camp hadn't changed much and didn't seem to have noticed their arrival, this young General Ruan was even more convinced that he would win. Since he got the news from Guangnan Prefecture, he didn't take any rest at all. It only took him a bit more than 2 days to arrive here. The enemy probably did not expect such speed. Since they did not expect it, they should be prepared to pay a heavy price. Did Yang Chendong not expect it? Was he not prepared? With 10,000 landmines buried around the camp, what did he need to prepare? What was there to prevent? In order to allow the enemy to surround and attack from all sides, he chose to set up camp in a spacious area. It seemed to be well connected and was advantageous for a large army to fight. It was all to lure the Jiaoji soldiers into attacking with all their might. Otherwise, he could have found a place with steep terrain and stayed there. Wouldn't it be safer if he used ancient Mount Hua as a path? Speaking of which, the reason why Yang Qindong chose to set up the first battle in Jiaoji here and use defense as offense was to allow everyone to adapt. If the army was made up of only Ling Feng and auxiliary soldiers, he would not have chosen such a battle strategy. Instead, he would have found a suitable place to initiate an attack. However, when the number of auxiliary soldiers was equal to the number of Ling Feng and auxiliary soldiers, he had to be more conservative. As long as they won the first battle, everyone's morale would reach an unprecedented high. The following battles would be much easier. Because of this, they had to win the first battle. Fortunately, there were 10,000 landmines lying in wait outside. Yang Qindong did not need to get too excited. He only needed to get all the soldiers to prepare for a counterattack and wait for the landmines to go off. As Yang Qindong and the 12,000 soldiers waited, the first landmine finally went off. It was like a bolt from the blue, causing the originally quiet rainforest to become lively. The reason why it became lively was because after the first explosion, the sounds did not stop. They appeared one after another, to the extent that it did not take long for the entire earth to begin to tremble. There were 10,000 landmines. Even if each landmine only sent 2 people to the sky, none of the Jiaoji soldiers would be left alive. Just imagine how majestic it would be. Boom! 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 The loud explosions continued. When Wan Yeyang, who was waiting for news, heard it, his face turned even uglier. The Jiaoji army was not completely useless. At the very least, they had heard about the strength of the mercenaries. Therefore, they knew about the incident where 20,000 Miao soldiers were ambushed and blown up in Gaozhou. Therefore, when they launched the attack this time, Wan Yeyang had made some preparations. For example, the formation of the army was to spread out. For example, he wanted the Han captives to charge at the front. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.